And we are live. Here we are. Welcome back.
Hey, Kyle and Jen. Welcome, everyone, to the officially unofficial Rings of Power After Party, brought to you by Fellowship of Fans and the Watch Party Network. My name is Michael. With me on screen is Jen Gallagher, my co-host on Watch Party's Lord of the Rings podcast.
Hello.
And also joining us is Kyle, Mr. Wizard himself, from Fellowship of Fans, who runs everything behind the curtain.
Great to be here behind the curtain today.
Doing great. Ready for round two. Let's do it.
Yeah. This episode was a doozy, and I'm really excited to talk about it and to hear from everybody in the chat. And remember that we have a live call-in component with both panels, so you'll have an opportunity to call in live and ask us questions, make comments. That's really going to be, I think, our favorite part of this whole thing. To participate in that, Kyle's going to be pinning a link in the chat right at the top. So you can click on that. You jump into our Discord. There's a channel for live call-ins. If you want to just say, hey, I have a question or a comment, and indicate what it is so we know kind of roughly what you want to talk about, then Kyle will give you a link and you can join up. Near the end of each panel, we'll reserve a good amount of time to talk about that stuff. We have, for those of us who are joining this stream for the first time, we had our first inaugural stream last week to discuss 1 and 2. We have 2 panels here. We have our newbie panel, which is composed of 3 excellent guests, and this is our forever panel. All right, these folks. Last week we had a couple of people who were subbing in. They did great, but now we have our full slate, and they'll be with us the entire season. They don't know Lord of the Rings. I mean, they may have watched the movies, because who hasn't? But they don't know the deeper lore, and they're not going to be reading articles and doing research as they watch the show. They're going to be experiencing it only through the show. So if you're in the same boat and you're discovering Tolkien and Middle Earth through this show, and you kind of want to experience a book spoiler-free analysis and engage without getting spoiled on, the ending, which all of us book nerds know, then this is the panel for you, because these folks are in the same boat. And Jen is going to be biting her tongue real hard not to let spill anything during the panel. So that's going to be really fun. And if you are a book lore nerd, I promise it'll be really entertaining to watch this panel. We do this on our Wheel of Time podcast, and a lot of our audience is big Wheel of Time book nerds. And it's really fun to watch the show and get a fresh perspective, to hear a fresh perspective through new eyes. And it's really hard to do that if you know the ending. So being able to watch a group of other folks who are really intelligent and insightful experience things for the first time, it really helps you enjoy it in a new way. After that, we'll be getting our book experts on. That'll be our lore panel. I'll be helming that. We have Harry from Daily Rings of Power on Twitter and the Daily Rings of Power podcast. We also have Strider from Fellowship of Fans, who joined us last week. And we've got Chris from the Philosopher's Games on YouTube. So that promises to be a really great panel. Now, before we jump into our lore panel, I just want to remind people that it's not just about the discussion. We want to use this stream and to engage with all aspects of the fandom. So if you've been following along with us, you've probably been cooking our food, some of the custom recipes that we've been tweeting out, Hobbit and Middle Earth inspired recipes that I've really enjoyed so far. And several of you have tweeted pictures at us. We know you're having fun with that. So in between the panels, we're going to highlight some of the photos that you sent in, cosplay that you've done. We've got some great cosplay to highlight. That's a really wonderful part of the fandom. And Tolkien artists. So each week we have been featuring a new Tolkien artist, and these people just toil away at their Tolkien art just for fun, for the passion of it, for the most part. And we really want to shine a big, bright spotlight on them and let you know that they have this great stuff out there. And we'll be raffling off a new piece of art every week that they have donated to us. So this week, our featured artist is Emily Austin. She is actually going to be featured in the official 2023 HarperCollins Tolkien calendar. Awesome. And she has some other cool projects on the way that we'll talk about in between our panels. But we want to get I want to get a shot of what we'll be raffling off today up on screen so that you can see. And the way that's going to work, if you engage with us in the chat, if you do a super chat, you'll be entered into the raffle to win a prize. So each $1 that you tip in the super chat function, it'll be 1 raffle ticket. If you do $5, that'll be 5 raffle tickets. $100, it'll be 100 raffle tickets. If anybody does that, you'll get an extra 100%. Prize. I'll give you a kiss. That's not a real promise. You probably don't want that, actually. So we'll be doing that, running that through the entire stream. Get your super chats in, and at the end of the stream, we'll announce the winner. So we're really excited for that. And if you don't win, that's fine. Emily has very generously created a discount code for her store. So if you go into her Etsy shop and put in FoF Watch Party as a discount code at checkout, you'll get 20% off any purchase. So we'll be going through some of the stuff you can buy in between our panels, but I just wanted to put that up front. She's great. Her art is great, and we'll be raffling that off through the stream. So without further ado, I think we're going to hand it off. Just remember, if you're in the chat or if you call in, be kind, be respectful. We've always had a good community here, and I just want to make sure that continues to be the case. So no personal attacks, no ugliness. We will be moderating heavily if any of that goes on. So, but otherwise, keep it light, keep it fun. And Jen, I think we're ready to go.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This is, again, the spoiler-free panel. So what we mean by that is we are going to go in depth about this episode and possibly the previous episodes that we just saw, but we're not going to be referencing the wider Tolkien canon. These folks have little to no knowledge of the wider Tolkien lore, so they're coming to it with fresh eyes. And I'm going to introduce my panelists right now, my wonderful team here. So first we have John from the wonderful What Up YouTube channel. They
Hi,
talk
folks.
about Wheel of Time. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Next up, we have the lovely Trisha Arand. She is from Beyond the Screenplay, a really excellent podcast that reviews film. Welcome.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
Excellent. And last but not least, we have Lottie, who guest hosts and co-hosts on the Unexpected podcast, an excellent Lord of the Rings Tolkien podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you guys, we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to go around and ask you for your one-word impression of episode 3. So we're going to start with you, John. One word, and then talk a little bit about this episode.
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot and go first, of course. One word, I'm going to say pretty. It's not a $5 word, but the episode was very pretty. It was visually stunning, and as far as I was concerned, there were a few hiccups here and there with how some of the CG went, in my opinion. But I guess we can get into that later on. But I did really enjoy the episode, and I thought it was just as, if not better, looking than the first two.
Yes, I agree. Visuals were right on point. Lottie, we'll go to you.
Is it okay if I say my word and then elaborate a little bit on it?
Oh, please do. Yes, please do.
Okay. So the buzzword for this episode for me was searching. I actually wanted to say finding your way, but it's not really one word. So I feel like Galadriel, she's searching for information. And then we have Halbrand searching for peace. The captured elves, they're searching for a way out. And then we have the Harfoots, especially Nori. She's searching also for her way and kind of like the balance to support her family, but at the same time to follow her heart and her gut feeling and figuring out who this stranger is. And then also Isildur and his sister, they're searching for their own paths and figuring out who they are. So, yeah.
I love that word. Yeah, I felt the people in the fan community are saying this was the most Tolkienian episode for them. So some of these broader themes like searching, seeking, and tied with nature and tied with the struggle of light and dark were very front and center in this episode, which is what I really liked about it. So thanks for that. Trisha, we'll go to you.
Yeah, sort of in the vein of what John chose for his word. I'm going to go with expensive. Good Lord, this show is expensive. Oh my God.
Most expensive show ever made.
I know it is. And you can see every penny. I mean, like, I just looking at Numenor, I was like, holy crap. It's astounding. It's fascinating. I love that of all the fandoms or all the I guess fandoms or sort of fantasy realms in all the whole world that they threw the money at this because it's one that I think has the potential to be really special. And so I love seeing the world so richly rendered here. And I think it's deserving of that. I don't know the Tolkien lore, but I know there's a lot of it. And that his vision was very complete. And so it's nice to see somebody bringing that passion and that completeness of vision to this show as well. It is a little dizzying to think about the amount of money each one of these episodes cost. But we don't have to spend too much time on the meta production aspects of what we just watched.
Right. Yeah, true. I mean, Numenor, something special about that city was that they really built that set. It's a
nuts.
real set. And
Wow.
the detail that you see, there are like seashells in the wall that are real seashells, sort of as a mural and things like that are just visually quite unbelievable. But I think all of that care contributes for me to the realism of the show, even though it's fantastical.
Yeah, I wonder if, you mentioned that people find this to be like the most Tolkien-esque episode so far. And I
Mhm.
wonder if it's because of all of the attention to detail in the production design. This isn't the volume like where they shot The Mandalorian, where it's all CG. There is texture to this world. And not that there isn't CG as well. Very, very expensive, good looking CG most of the time. But there's a tactile nature to the world that makes it feel like lived in and built out beyond the edges of the frame.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, not too much CG, something I was thrilled with and a lot of people were thrilled with. And we'll just get right into it. Were the orcs of this episode, because those are real
Yes.
actors. Those are real actors,
Yep.
right? And Peter Jackson did the same thing. He used real actors with just a lot of masks and face paint. And with that, we'll go right to Arondir's plot line. So we enter this episode and Rondir's been captured by these orcs. He wakes up, he's disoriented. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about his particular storyline. John, we'll start with you.
His storyline ties for my favorite storyline between them and the Harfoots, I guess is the best way to put it. They're my two favorites for it. And there was, in my opinion, a lot of really, really great things about this. And it's funny that you mentioned that a lot of the fans of the Tolkien, I guess you can call it a metaverse now, since there's so much stuff, thought that this was the most Tolkien-esque episode, because I thought this was the episode when they actually hit their stride and started telling the story. I mean, the first two were setup episodes, are a little slow, but this one actually started telling the story. And I loved the orcs. I'm not going to lie, I was really jealous.
Jealous, like you wanted to be an orc? Like play an
No,
orc?
I cover a lot of Wheel of Time stuff, and initially they did that for the Wheel of Time show. So there was a lot of people in prosthetics. They created over 40 different unique creatures, and then they had to go to CG later on. So I'm really, really hoping that they keep with actors and prosthetics and masks and makeup, because I like practical effects way better. I'm a child of the 80s. I liked The Abyss, Alien, Predator, all of the older movies where they had to build the sets. They had to do all those things. I enjoyed all of that. Now, saying that, there was one very jarring moment during this particular storyline that brought me out of it. And I paused the show and I was like, and that was the warg.
Oh,
not well done at all.
Yeah.
And I think it was because everything else looked so nice and so real. Now, I think if it was in any other show or in any other place, I would be like, yeah, okay, that's fair. That's done well. But compared to everything else, it was pretty bad. It looked like I went to Spirit Halloween and saw something on the wall. That's it didn't move naturally. I didn't like it, but I really enjoyed where the story ended off and how they incorporated the nature of the elves and stuff. I liked that whole storyline. That was the only part of it that I didn't enjoy.
Yeah, in thinking how they would actually make a warg look more realistic, I'm not sure how they would go about doing that. Although people,
I would have been happier with American Werewolf in London, like 70s style, like animatronic. I would have been happier with that than what they did, honestly.
Anyone else had a problem with the warg? It seems like Trisha, you were really nodding along. Like, yeah, that was.
I mean, my issue with the warg, I didn't love how it looked. I'm not an expert on CG or anything like that. I do think it's hard to make a creature like that look grounded as it interacts with an environment that is otherwise essentially real. My issue with the fight with the warg was just how gory it was, and it seemed it really surprised me. It's like people getting their stomachs ripped out didn't feel like the show I'd been watching up until this point. And we can get back to what happened in Numenor and the broken wrist, which I didn't need either. I'm not going to say it feels like beyond the bounds of Lord of the Rings, generally speaking. But it reminded me a little of I hate to have to say this, the extended version of the Hobbit movies, Battle of the Five Armies, where all of the are those wargs also? Anyway, I think so, but people are just getting ripped apart left and right in that movie, and it just looks like everyone's made of jam. There's just like blood flying. There's just like jam, like blood flying everywhere. And it's really surprising when you have these like outbursts of violence that that feel more graphic than they need to be to tell a story. I think
I would have been happier if they went back to what they did in episode 2, where it was all suggestions.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
It would have been creepier, scarier, more compelling, in my opinion, too. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I certainly think they're pushing the envelope in terms of goring and violence more than this fandom is used to, right? If it were Game of Thrones, it would be like blood and guts, and this would have been like tame. But I certainly think that they're kind of introducing us to more and more, slowly but surely, more and more of this like graphic, bloodier, more violent world, and I think some people are perturbed by that. I personally don't think it was too overboard, but we'll see, because there's a lot of the season left and there's a lot of future seasons. So
yeah, I know that that's trendy to make things like edgier and more violent, and if it serves the story, I think that's great. I just don't want to see it happen just because it's trendy.
Yeah, and I think they did use some subtlety, right? Like the moment when his throat is slit by the orc, the elf's throat is slit. They didn't actually show a lot of that. They cut away just as the skin was opening, which I actually think was artfully done, right? They panned the camera away and then he fell to the ground. There wasn't just spurts of blood everywhere. So that moment really worked for me. And I thought it was a really like touching, heartbreaking moment when he catches his friend and you just feel that pain. And the acting there, man, it was spot on for me.
It was good. The only thing I'm worried about going forward is Amazon is very prone to the explosions per minute trope. They think unless something's blowing up or something's graphic or shocking, it's not going to interest people. It's the same reason they don't like going over 8 episodes per season. They don't like going over 55 minutes per episode normally. It's because that's their data suggests that people stop paying attention. So character driven is best, I think, for fantasy. It always has been, and I think it always will be. And I think a lot of the execs in that world that aren't fantasy fans are slowly getting the picture, I hope. But I think it's going to take a little longer.
Lottie, I'm curious to hear from you, because you have just a little bit of knowledge of Tolkien. If the moment where Ishmael Cruz Cordova is interacting with the tree in the storyline, with the not wanting to cut the tree down and seeing the destruction of nature, I'm curious to hear what your reaction was to that. And if you appreciated it, if it worked for you, if it didn't work for you.
Oh, absolutely. I love how they make the elves, they're so close to nature. They have been around for such a long time that they do see trees grow and see how long they stick around, and that they're part of the earth. They're not just things, they're actually living things. And pretty symbolic, I thought, when, I don't know if I'm going too far at the end to the end, but Arondir grabbing a root from the tree, I think, to kill an orc, when he turns around to grab that, and I think it was part of the tree. So that was pretty symbolic, that now he uses that part that they wanted to cut down to kill that orc. I thought it was pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was the whole sequence was really great, where he's, showing the respect for nature and almost apologizing. He is apologizing to the tree for having to cut it down. But when he lays eyes on sort of the waste of what's happened to the earth, what they've done, they've savaged the earth. That is such a purely like Tolkienian moment. And I thought it was very impactful, the way the slow pan happened, and a really like thoughtful still moment, to juxtapose with a lot of the action that we got in the whole episode. So I felt like there was a good balance of like action and thoughtfulness tied into this. So John, to your concern, I too hope they don't go too overboard with the action sequences, and they keep finding that nice balance of contemplative moments tied with the action. Well, I feel like we should get to Numenorian storyline, which I felt like was the real meat and potatoes of this episode. So, this time we'll start with you, Lottie. Your thoughts on Galadriel arriving in Numenor, Halbrand in Numenor, meeting Queen Muriel for the first time.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
So, we already mentioned it. Numenor looks so gorgeous. It's just this grand place that almost feels like I think Halbrand says it even. It feels like paradise. And I think it's also close and it's in between, right? It's in between Valinor and Middle Earth, an island in between. So we feel like this closeness to paradise almost. I think that it's such a good job. And because I didn't know where they were going really. So we follow Galadriel, how she wakes up on that ship, and then we see these on top of the ship, the what's it called, the armor or the uniform they wear. It looks so beautiful. I think they, in general, in the show, they do such a good job at creating those contrasts, even if it's in Lindor, where the elves are, and the blue and the golden yellow, and the same here in Numenor. The gear that they wear is also this golden yellow and the blue, and it just pops. It's so good. It looks so good. And then you get all this mystery. Why, we don't know. Why are the elves not welcome there? Why do they hate on Galadriel so much? And you asked the favorite or storyline that stuck out to me the most. I would have said Halbrand, because I get so many questions in my head when I watch his story arc or the storyline in this episode, because he's like in search of that peace, but then at the same time we see how he gets when triggered almost when he tries to be nice to those people in the pub, but then they trigger him and we see an outburst of rage and violence again of him. And one thing about Halbrand, real quick, I don't know if that's any hint or anything at all that makes sense, but my native language is actually German, and if you take his name apart, there's two components to it. It's Hall and Brand in German, and those both have meanings. Hall is like an echo, and Brand is like a big fire. So I have no idea if that makes any sense. But it's
Cool.
because names are so significant in the Tolkien verse and languages.
Absolutely.
So that's something I noticed, that his name is very sounds very German-esque or Germanic. I don't know. Yeah.
And I'm certain it will have significance, and I'm not going to say anything else.
Okay.
Because I'm.
So yeah, he was definitely a character I love to follow his story and his weirdness. Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed him. He's a wily one, for sure. He's a little confusing. We'll go to Trisha. Thoughts on Numenor, Halbrand, all of it?
Yeah, lots of thoughts. Halbrand I really like. His character feels a little hard to pin down for me in a way that I think is probably deliberate, but does make it a little bit hard to get to like know what to expect from him in any given scene. Because the way that we met him, he was kind of like roguish, maybe not very trustworthy, right? He leaves behind his companions to die on the raft.
Shady boots.
Yeah, it's a little Han Solo-y. And I was expecting a little bit more of that energy from him. But he like weirdly stepped into sort of a role of diplomacy in this episode, where he was like, well, let us stay for 3 days, and kind of stepped in to negotiate. And
a surprising moment there.
A very surprising moment. And, you know, again, if you had put somebody like Han Solo in that same room, he would have taken charge immediately, right? And just been like, let me do the talking. I've got this. And like told Galadriel to like, you know, let him kind of like
take a seat,
smooth everything over. And of course she wouldn't have, but it's funny that he was at first on the back foot and then stepped forward into the democracy role, and then like sneakily pickpocketed that knife. And, you know, he kind of has these interesting switches. The same thing with the, in the scene where he was talking to the Smiths or whoever they are, the iron workers. At first, he's deliberately antagonistic toward them. And it's like, well, what's your goal there, Halbrand? and then he switches and, you know, buys them drinks and then tries to pickpocket. And so he is shifty. And so
that's the right word.
I'm not sure, you know, it feels like the show is trying to tell me he's really honorable at heart and he really is the king. I have questions about that. But I'm not even sure that the show really believes that, or that the actor really believes that, if that makes sense.
Yes, there's a definite tension within his character that we're seeing.
Yeah. And I don't know if the show knows how it wants me to feel, because I don't know how I feel. Yeah, I'll put it that way.
Conflicted, perhaps.
Indeed.
John, we'll go to you.
So I want to talk a little bit about Hallbrand. I really like his character now. I didn't like him at the end of the second episode, and I also hated the scenes with him and Galadriel at the end of the second episode. I did not enjoy them. They didn't feel natural. They felt like they had no chemistry, and it wasn't great.
Bind yourself to me didn't work for you?
Not really, no.
Interesting.
But they really redeemed themselves. Third episode, their scenes together were really good. Hallbrand's scenes by himself were really good. Galadriel's scenes by herself were really good. Hallbrand sort of seems like, to me, if I had to use any other fantasy property, like the second son who didn't think he would ever have to take over the throne and was all of a sudden thrust into responsibility but didn't want it and ran away. That's what he seems like to me. He's sort of like scoundrelly and he has all these different things, but there's also the commanding presence about him, like you folks said. Like, I don't know what he is. I don't know if he's the king or maybe one of the royal family of the Southlands. I have no idea how that works, but I liked the way his character was. The fight was really good. The breaking of the wrist was a little jarring, a little out of tone with the rest of the storyline and what happened there. So I could have, like you folks said earlier, I could have done without that. But Numenor itself, gorgeous, beautiful. I had no issues with anything here. I thought everything was great except for the horse ride. And
slow-mo.
And that's why it was. I felt like I was watching the Never-Ending Story, if that makes any sense. It was.
This director loves slow-mo. I was like going through and marking down all the slow motion.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
overall,
it was. I liked the emotion that Galadriel showed. I liked that she was happy. I liked all of that. I didn't like the way they conveyed it. It just felt really cheesy, and that was.
It did linger a long time on her face. A long.
It did. It was a little weird. It was a little weird.
Yeah, it was a little much.
I'm really curious why it wasn't set up. Like, so if horses are extra special to Galadriel, I get that there's an elfin horse thing, I guess, or I'm inferring that. But if for some reason they're really, really special to Galadriel, I feel like we should have known that earlier.
We could have maybe seen that in the first episode, right? Instead of like the childhood bully scene. I totally agree with you. Yes. We should have seen her maybe connecting with horses in that way, or some insight into her character beyond her just getting like bullied by a bunch of elvish kids, which that was like my least favorite scene so far. Did not work for me at all.
I have a lot of Galadriel thoughts, and maybe we can come back to them because
let's go to Galadriel now. Okay, let's go to Galadriel and Numenor in particular. But yeah,
sure. So I woke up at 2 a.m. last night, and I started thinking about Galadriel, and
it happens to me all the time.
Thank you. You know, there is a problem that I have with the way the character is written. And when we so here's what it is. When we talk in screenwriting that protagonists in particular, not so much secondary characters or tertiary characters, protagonists need to have a flaw. And the thing about that is the flaw has to be something that causes negative consequences in the life of the character that they care about. So take something like Captain America. His flaw, it's also one of his strengths, is that he believes in complete self-sacrifice for a cause. Sorry, spoilers for the character arc of Captain America.
It's been out a long time.
Thank you. Anyway, but he believes in complete self-sacrifice for a cause. The problem with that is at the end of the first movie, he sacrifices himself for a cause, and it costs him something that he really cares about. It costs him the relationship with a person he cares about, and it costs him like 50 years of time and like disconnection from his entire life and society. And that bothers him personally. It causes conflict. He starts to question whether or not his way of being in the world is right or completely good. This is the same with virtually any protagonist that has an arc that you could name. So they have a strength usually pushed to the point of being a flaw. And most of the time they may not care about the consequences, but something happens and they stop and they go, hang on, I actually don't like this consequence of my flaw. And that is the first bump. It usually happens in the first act of a movie. And it's the first bump that causes them to want to change or to start to question who they are. Now, they usually plow on and go ahead with their flaw anyway into the second act, and sometimes even into the third act, or they continue to wrestle with it. But it has to have negative consequences that really bother them. My problem with Galadriel is, so she's stubborn, she's fiery, she's aggressive. All of those things are fine. They're her strengths, but they are and can be a flaw. But so far, they haven't cost her anything that she cares about. They do have consequences, right? Like she gets her company gets mutinies essentially, and then gets disbanded, and then she almost gets sent home to Valinor, which she decides not to do. It brings her into constant conflict with every single person around her, but she doesn't care about that. It doesn't bother her actually at all that any of that happens. And so I don't see her being nudged toward an eventual change. I just continue to see her plowing ahead. And that concerns me because no matter which way you slice up the acts of an 8-part series, we're definitely through the first act already. And I feel like we should have had that bump already if we are going to see a change from Galadriel.
I tend to agree with you. I think that the showrunners needed to emphasize that her not going to Valinor should have been a bigger deal. And that should have definitely perturbed her. And I think we will see the consequences of that later. But it's making total sense, and I'm tracking with you that she seems almost less dynamic to me, and I've said this also, because she is so single-minded. And I have said, and nobody I feel like has agreed with me up until you, that I need to see more from her in terms of less, like, not as much fire and fury, but more contemplativeness, or like some hint of the Galadriel that we get later.
Yeah, we need some inner conflict from the character about the way that she's going, because that's the essence of a protagonist. And it, like I said, it doesn't bother us. Like somebody like Legolas from the original series, he's not the protagonist. He's just over there somewhere. We don't need a lot of soul searching from him or anything like that. But if the series is setting her up to be our protagonist and setting her up to have these really strong characteristics, but I just am wondering what is the bump on that that's going to eventually cause her to change, to want to change.
I think I know when the bump's going to happen, and I don't like it. So
go on.
Amazon really, really, really likes cliffhangers, and I don't know why, and they're usually not good ones. So my guess is we're going to see something happen with her in the very last episode, maybe even in the last scenes, and then they go like, until next time, you know what I mean? Like, and that'll be the hook. And I don't like that at all, because I don't like a hook being character growth. If that makes any sense at all. I don't want
it does.
to wait to see a character evolve a little bit. I'd like to see it during like a natural ebb and flow during the season. Again, I'm going to talk about Wheel of Time because I know that really well. They did that with the Wheel of Time with 3 or 4 things in the final episode that just didn't work at all. They were really bad. Part of it was due, they had to rewrite everything last minute. There was a whole lot of changes and things that went on, but the other part of it was there was a lot of pressure from the execs that we like cliffhangers. We want to see these things happen. This is what will happen because it will keep people coming back for more, because the execs didn't seem to understand their audience. And I think my guess is, and I hope I'm wrong, I really do, is that we'll see it in episode 8, maybe in the last 20 minutes or so. And I don't want that to happen. I really don't, but I think we will.
Well, I want to hear from Lottie because I know she's dying to say something.
Yeah, because I want to respond to what you said, Trisha, because it's so interesting to get those insights on the screenwriting process and everything, and the thoughts you put behind it. But I'm just someone, I don't have any background knowledge in cinematography or like producing a movie or show at all. So I'm just the one who just sits down and watches the show. And I like to rewatch shows because I'm also a person who sometimes I miss things, like big things. So that's why I like to watch it a second time where I can see all the little details after the first impression. And for me, I gotta say, Galadriel works because for me, that she gave up Valinor was enough of a flaw or of something that was important to her that she gave up, because we learn about her. Valinor is so. It used to mean everything to her, and I think she is supposed to be someone who doesn't show a lot of emotions at this point because of the loss of her brother, because of her search that kind of led to nowhere, and no one's trying to support her anymore. Everyone's just saying, no, it doesn't matter. It's been years and years. We don't believe there's anything around here anymore. We're all safe. It's all peaceful. And she almost like, it's almost like she shut down on those emotions and letting people in. And I feel like that's her whole thing. Now that with Halbrand and the information, I feel like we get a little bit of excitement because this is what she's been searching for so long. And the horse scene, by the way, also first time watching it, I just started laughing because it did seem a little ridiculous at first, but watching it a second time and thinking about why did they do that, because this is really the first time we see her smile like that. And they wanted to put that emphasis on, that's why they slowed it down. And maybe, yeah, you're right. Maybe the producer likes slow-mos, but it does look a little bit funny. But I actually, second time watching it, I did enjoy it because that's when we see her the first time. She does show a little bit of emotion and character. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that what you're getting at is that why Galadriel does work and can work is that, again, her traits are bringing her into actual conflict with the world around her.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the stuff of drama. Mm-hmm. And so if her quest to kill Sauron is compelling to you, and it's compelling to me too, and so you're not like, oh, I wonder what she's feeling about the fact that she didn't go to Valinor. I think that that's like valid. It's a valid way to like watch the show. My brain's broken as a screenwriter because I'm craving this moment of introspection of, if she's really sad that she made the choice not to go to Valinor, that might have been her last chance, right? Or if she'd been more homesick for it all along, where we had a scene where she's like, I'm dying to go back to this person or that world, or my horse that I loved so much in Valinor, whatever it is, like, if we had that moment of like, this is a cost for her, and then a moment where we see her grieving it later,
that would be way better. Yeah,
we would have been more sympathetic to her.
Absolutely.
Or even if they explain the importance of Valinor. I mean,
yes,
I know it's a place that here's a reward, it's a good thing, but what
we don't care enough about it,
right?
Yeah,
I'm not saying
it's not
a weak storyline. It just could be stronger, I think.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that they go ahead.
I just want to say I understand what you mean with, we talked about how we don't get any story before that horse scene, her relationship with the horses, and then I think Jen said it last week. Same thing with I'm blacking out on the name here.
Arondir and Bronwyn.
Yes, thank you. Arondir and Bronwyn. Same thing there. I do not actually like their storyline so far, just because we don't have that connection to them. It just felt like we kind of witnessed, okay, they have something going on, but we don't have any backstory on that. Yeah.
I didn't see Bronwyn at all this episode, so we're hoping next.
I was kind of sad about. I wanted to see more of that.
Yeah.
I really did.
Same. I am curious to hear what you guys thought about Muriel, Tar Muriel, Queen Muriel, the Queen of Numenor, and the Chancellor, and that storyline. Can we get thoughts on that? John, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I don't know what's going on there. I'm going to be completely
honest. Okay, so it was confusing. Yeah, I was curious.
That's why everybody's hesitating.
Yeah, so it was a little confusing. I get that they're in charge. I get that they don't like elves. I get that they used to like elves. I don't get how they got to where they're at. And at the end, when they went up to, I assume, was the actual king's chambers, to say that the elf is here. I assume there's some sort of prophecy involved. There's something going on there. That's my guess. I really don't know. I thought both the actress and the actor that played them did a fantastic job. They played their roles really well, but it was pretty confusing because I didn't really understand their importance, if that makes any sense, and how they really fit. I hope that's explained a bit later on, because I like that sort of thing. Or maybe I should have gone into the X-ray stuff on Amazon, and maybe that would have explained it to me. I don't know, because I didn't do that.
No, for the purposes of this panel, okay. I just want you to come in like, if you're confused, say that, you know.
Okay, yeah, no, I was confused about how they fit in. I liked it. I just hope it's explained a bit better. That makes sense.
Yeah. Anyone else have that reaction?
Oh yeah, totally. I agree with John. I don't really know how they fit into all of that, and I still have questions about why did they give that sword to Elendil? Right? I thought first, like, are they supposed to kill someone? Are they supposed to assassinate?
Yeah, I thought he was going to go kill Galadriel. I'm like, well,
right.
She did.
That didn't make sense. But shout out again to the costume designers. Her dress looks fabulous. And her hair.
Gorgeous.
I mean, yeah, she looks stunning. And they did great acting there. But yeah, still, I think we're supposed to feel confused at this point.
Yeah, I wish they had just told me in this episode what the deal is. Like, or even what the fake deal is. Like, even if they say that they don't like elves for X, Y, and Z reason, but that's kind of bullshit. Give me at least that reason so that I can be like, okay, I think the issue is if Galadriel is going to navigate the situation that she's in, she and we kind of need to know what the smart play would be. So if they don't like elves because elves are haughty and ageless, which sure, maybe that's a valid reason not to like elves. That seems to be the problem that that Durin had with Elrond. Right? It's like you don't care about my timeline. I can't relate to you. If that's the issue or whatever the reason they claim it is, at least get the fake reason out in the open. If there's like a real secret reason because of the prophecy, that's also fine. But I just need something in the here and now to like make sense of anybody's motivation scene to scene.
There's a little too much mystery in every storyline.
Yeah.
I guess is the best way to put it. They're like, there's going to be 5 or 6 big reveals in the next couple episodes. And I'm like, I'm not one for big reveals. They're great, but make 1, maybe 2, and make them count. Don't do like 6. Do you know what I mean? Like they don't like the elves will be a big reveal. Who Adar? Did I say that right? Adar is Adar.
We didn't even get to meet him. That's the name of the episode. We didn't meet him.
Who that is? That's going to be another big reveal. What's going on with Bronwyn? What's going to be another big thing? What happens after he's recaptured? Like there's so many cliffhangers and mysteries and big. Is it
losing you a little bit because there's so many? Okay.
Yes, it's almost like they're like, we need to do as many as possible because that's the only way people will come back next week. That's 100% not the reason I go back to the show.
You guys have no idea how hard it is for me to not put on my nerd glasses and be like, well, the reason they don't like the elves.
I've watched Lost probably half a dozen times, and there was a lot of shit, 26 episodes or more per season with a lot of that shit in it, and it's worked because it wasn't too much. It's just too much crammed into 3 episodes so far. I
think some people would disagree with you about the later seasons of Lost being too much. However, I fundamentally agree that you do need to answer some questions. You can't keep raising questions. You got to answer a couple.
And I felt like the scene where Galadriel and Halbrand are walking through the town, right? And they're getting all these stares from the humans. And she gives some backstory there. She actually gives a lot of backstory there, but it was rushed, and it felt to me very manufactured of like, guys, we need to give background. They need context. They need context quick. Yeah. Give some, but it wasn't enough.
She actually said we're about to find out. So everyone's
I know.
Okay, we're about to find out. Cool.
But you didn't find out necessarily.
Yeah, right.
Why the elves are hated. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm sure that they will get to it. Do I think they needed to get to it sooner? Yes, because there's so much coming. And I definitely am a fan of the slow burn, and I wish there had been more of a slow burn and some context for some of these things. But then again, they do have a lot of seasons. So we'll see. Last thing in Numenor. What was revealed in this episode was that there was a map, that the orcs are following a map, Sauron's map, right? So the brand makes sense. And that big reveal, I felt like was a focal point of the episode. So I'm curious to hear if that scene, what you guys thought of that scene. And I'll start with you, Lottie.
I think the scene was okay. For me, it was just like I wondered what's the new information here really. Maybe I missed it. But we get she sees the sign is actually a map, and that they were in the south. But didn't they know that before? And I mean, the big thing is, she says it's worse than she thought. Well, did she think he was only gonna take over the south and then stop? Like I don't really understand what the big reveal is to her. Yeah, if that makes sense in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
For that, I didn't like the brand, like Sauron's mark was a map. I saw that and I was like, oh, really?
Too obvious?
Well, no, I was just like, all right, I guess. But here you have, I don't know how old Galadriel is, but she's old. And you have all the other elves who are real old, who have seen maps. I mean, they've seen maps. They have probably lots of maps. How has not one of them put two and two together and went, oh, it looks like this little mountain range here. Oh, goodness. I saw it and I was just like, I thought it was cheap. I thought it was a really cheap way of doing that. I didn't like it. And like Lottie just said, I don't really get what the big thing was to her. Like, why didn't she believe that it was, how's it going to be worse? What does that mean? Like, does that mean that, does this particular area of the world have something special that gives them more power, that can cause them to do other things? I have no idea. Like, it was confusing, and I don't know. That part there, not that it was terrible, but I didn't like the brand being a map, and I didn't think it was explained well enough. But again, I have no basis in lore whatsoever, so maybe it's that you could be thinking, well, you're just an idiot. But there's a lot of people like me watching the show going, I don't know.
Absolutely. There's so many new people who are coming to it with no context whatsoever. And there's, the show has some splaining to do. So I think what they were trying to get at was, there's a plan. Sauron has a plan that's been set in motion. And this proves my point that he's not extinct, and they're organizing, they're gathering, right? But I think that wasn't necessarily crystal clear from this big reveal, and so the scene didn't quite trigger the viewer to be more threatened by what she's finding out.
Yeah, two things. Thing number one is the problem with the map being, the brand being a map, is that it points Galadriel to the same region she thought Sauron was in anyway. So if she hadn't gotten that info from Halbrand, right? Like if Halbrand had another reason for being on his ship and being out in the water, like say, for example, he was trying to get away from the responsibility of being a king, and not orcs, then it wouldn't have mattered to her. And we didn't, she's not any closer to getting back to Middle Earth or the Southlands than she was in the last episode. So if she wasn't looking at the Southlands already, then this would be a huge piece of information for her to receive. The problem is she already was planning to go there. So if that's where Sauron's hiding, then we kind of already knew that fact. Thing two is I am desperate to know what the search engine is or like how the elf card catalog system works. She like gave the guy a picture.
Yes.
I was just like, oh my God, she just gave him the picture and he came back in 20
Yeah, he's
seconds
like,
and he got all the
here's-
records. Like,
Here's the thing. Take the thing.
yeah, like, is there a computer somewhere? How did he find it so fast? That was my other main question coming out of that scene.
Yeah, that moment also didn't work for me, where it was like, he's the Google of elves.
He really seemed to be. I was like, also, they just had this old guy shuffle in and like give her the information in 10 seconds. I was like, I would have questions for that guy. How did you find this so quick? Did you just know it? Like, you seem magical, sir. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of like, there were some loosey-goosey elements, I thought, in that scene. I think they're trying.
Taken. Yeah.
They're obviously trying to push the plot forward, push it forward. Okay, now she really needs to get back to Middle Earth. Like, it's go time, right? And I think that's what they were trying to accomplish.
I could just hear one of the writers in the writers' room bringing this exact thing up and being like, "I'm sorry, what? So it's just the guy's gonna just bring it?" And the showrunner probably going like, "No. How else do you want to do it? We have to get through this."
I could talk to you guys. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say my biggest complaint about the series so far is the same complaint I had for the Wheel of Time. I know everything there is to know about the Wheel of Time. I read the series over 70 times, and when I watched the show, everything made a lot of sense to me. But I watched it with my wife. My wife has never read the books, didn't know much about them, and I spent more time explaining things to her than we did watching the show because none of it made any sense to her. And when I went into Lord of the Rings, it's the same thing. I'm pausing and I'm like, well, I'm not going to Google this, but I really want to because they're not explaining anything properly for a new fan. I'm hoping that eventually they do, but we're already 3 episodes deep. And I know for a lot of Tolkien fans or people who know the lore, it's probably great. Like, oh, I know that. I know this. This is great. Easter egg. Good thing. But that's not the bulk of the viewers, unfortunately. So.
And I do want to say that in spite of all of our complaining, I am having a good time watching the show. And the Harfoots are really working for me.
Let's quickly talk about that storyline. We do have
wonderful.
to hand it over to panel 2 very momentarily, but let's talk about the Hobbits' impressions on the Harfoots this episode and that story.
That's all you're getting from me. I'm super happy.
I mean, my complaints about Galadriel, I don't have for Nori. Like, she has a flaw. She's curious. She, walks off path. She, doesn't feel like she fits in with the Harfoots, but it costs her relationship with her parents and potentially with the rest of her tribe. Yeah, and that means something to her. She feels regret and concern about that and inner conflict about it. Yeah, and Poppy, it's wonderful.
And whoever plays Nori, I don't know the actress's name, but she is, in my opinion,
what a joy.
Best actress in the show. Bar none, hands down. I would hand her every award I possibly could. She is fantastic.
Very dynamic, yeah.
I really love it.
Do we have to wrap it up? No. Okay. I love the scene when the stranger comes out and they all get to see him and they all hide, and it's the same we got in the I think first or second episode, how well, even if the shot is directly at them, you can't see the Harfoots anymore. Like, costumes are so good. And even what's the leader's name? I forget. His thing in the hair, like the grass or straws or whatever, and we only see his eye. Like, that was brilliant to me. Yeah. How they did that.
Not enough nice things to say about those particular scenes. I would just watch a show about the Harfoots and no one else, and I'd be happy.
Same. I need a book of Harfoot idioms. I love all of their there are some Elvish idioms too that are like, okay, those are creative. But the Harfoot idioms are so evocative and feel like, oh, the Dwarvish idioms are really good too. But I really love the Harfoot idioms and the way that their dialogue is written.
The only thing, did it feel cruel to anyone else that they would just leave the Brandyfoots behind just because they're slow and injured and stuff? They would just say, okay, you're on your own.
I'll be like, see you later.
Yeah, it's a bit...
Needs the many outweigh the needs of the few. I get it. I understand. They're caravan people and they can't...
Yeah.
They can't because it would put everyone at risk. I get it. Didn't like it. Made me sad, but I get it.
I mean, I thought that the scene where they were remembering those left behind kind of clarified for me that they really only leave behind people that they absolutely cannot like save and bring with
Right.
them, right? Like a lot of it's clear that those people, they were eaten by wolves, or they were caught in an avalanche, or they were
An
they
idiot getting hit by
died,
bees.
right? Bees. But it made me feel like they really wouldn't like abandon the Brandyfoots to actual death. But then the way that her family was talking about it did seem very dire.
They gave them a shot, but it was a slim shot.
Right.
Yeah. And by being the last one in the in the last place, they are almost like an outcast now. The whole family are almost like outcasts. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm trying to follow the chat and I can't.
There's a lot going on over there.
There was a lot going on in there. Hello, everybody. Sorry if I offended anybody.
It's okay. They did give us the name of the actress who plays Nori, though, because what a delight she is. Markella Kavanaugh.
Markella, she's amazing. Absolutely phenomenal.
Agree.
And I think so.
We might have.
Back.
Thank you guys. I want to thank you all for your wonderful insights. That was a lot of fun. I love hearing about the show through, your perspective. So I appreciate it, and I can't wait to continue on this journey with you all. So thanks to the newbie panel. We're going to go to our lore panel now, our expert panel, but we're going to have a few announcements before we do that. So goodbye to the newbie. So much. See you next week.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Okay. All right. We are back. Thank you, Jen.
All right. So thank you so much to John, Trisha, and Lottie for that awesome panel. Every time I have not been disappointed at the experience of watching the newbie panel, because their subjective experience watching the show is so different in places. Sometimes it lines up very consistently with my experience watching it as a book nerd, but then sometimes it varies wildly, and it's just so fun to get that different perspective. And it also makes me rethink the way I'm viewing it. But that will get into something that I think we'll talk about in our lore panel, the way in which I think this episode creates deliberately two different watching experiences. It nods to things that they know book readers will recognize, but also knowing that non-book readers will not see that, and kind of creates mysteries that one half of the audience will appreciate. But we're going to talk more about that in the lore panel. Before we get there, I want to give some shout-outs and big thank yous to all the people in the Tolkien community who have been engaging with us and having a lot of fun with these shows. The first is food. Every week we've had somebody new. Been 2 weeks, but we'll continue to do this. We've had somebody new produce a Middle-earth inspired this week, and I think we got some people who sent us photos of their food and drinks that they made. The recipes were provided by Astrid Winiger, and she was a Latin professor, loves Middle-earth. She's got amazing blog that's fantasy inspired. A lot of Middle-earth stuff in there. Fun blog. It goes off in a lot of directions. Enjoy it. You would enjoy it. And she gave us. We took a couple recipes from her blog with her permission. One of which was Bannock's, which is Scottish kind of bread that you honey and jam. And another was woodland venison skewers, which if anybody actually used real venison, please let me know, because I would be amazed. I think most people substitute beef for pork, because I don't know where you get venison unless you're hunting it yourself. And my bow is collecting dust in the garage, so I didn't break it out for. But Astrid Winiger, go check out her blog. It's astridwiniger.com. She's got a couple of cookbooks that have a lot of recipes related to Middle-earth and fantasy in general. The first is called Cooking for Halflings and Monsters, 111 comfy, cozy recipes for fantasy-loving souls a year. And then there was a follow-up to that, volume 2, a year of comfy, cozy stews and chilies, cooking for halflings and monsters, volume 2. And you can get both of those on Kindle through Amazon for $4. Actually, and I recently checked last night. It's on sale for $3. So real steal if you like to make Tolkien-inspired food. We also got a great drink there you can see on screen from our friends over at Liquor and Lore. They've been doing a new drink cocktail recipe every single week. This one's called the Harfoot Smash, very on theme after we saw Harfoots just guzzling berries by the handful. This was a blackberry cocktail with bourbon and basil and lemon. So follow along. We're going to tweet out our new recipe tomorrow. And so everybody can just kind of have a cocktail together and eat the same food on the night of. And that's been a lot of fun. And please do go support Astrid Winiger. It was great that she agreed to let us use her stuff. I also want to highlight some cosplay. Cosplay is a wonderful, wonderful part of the Tolkien community, a great way to engage. I don't do it. I was never good at dressing up, but I love and just totally admire the people who pull this off. And we had a gal send us some pictures of her Galadriel cosplay from the first couple episodes. She's on Instagram, Virena, and I'm butchering that name, but it's Vita de Tolkieniani. And we'll get a picture up here momentarily. And just beautiful cosplay she's got a 3D printed dagger, Finrod's dagger. It looks amazing, really quite on point. So we're going to thank her. We're going to be sending out a shirt. We've got this great Eldar Millennial shirt that we're handing out to people who are participating. So thank you very much, Virena, for sending us your cosplay pictures. And if you're doing cosplay at home, please send us your pictures. And it doesn't have to be, this is professional grade. This is really great stuff. Jen, Kyle, don't you agree? This is amazing.
Totally stunning. Like, wow. And to do it in that time frame too. Like the show's been out for a couple weeks and to have all this, it's amazing.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to be professional grade. If you just have some, Hobbit feet, you got your Hobbit ears on. If you just, threw some acorns in your hair, if you didn't even shower and you just have a dirty head and that's your Harfoot cosplay, send us a picture of that. Yes. We would love to feature you on the stream here. Last, I want to, let's do the trivia. So we did some trivia every Saturday. Basically, we tweet out a little trivia question, which we have tried to make really, really difficult, but y'all are so good at finding the answers. Immediately, there were a million of you. We got 25 correct answers. And that was actually last night that I checked. There may be more. But the question was, so in this episode, one of the sailors on a Isildur ship tied the wrong knot and needed to be saved. And so the question was, what was his name? And pretty much everyone got it right. I thought it would be a little tough, but the name was Imrahil, which I loved that nod to the lore. There is a Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth in the Third Age. So I love that they grabbed that name and managed to find a way to slip it in. A great little Easter egg for us book readers. And so we got 25 right answers. We're just going to pick one at random. And I'm really excited by the person who won. It's Wizardway Chris, who, if you follow their Twitter account, actually, they're doing a lot of translations. So they did the translation for Don Marshall's shirt that is going around that says, you're all welcome here, and has different colored elf ears. Wonderful shirt. So I would also encourage you to go support Don Marshall and buy that shirt. It's a really important time to show solidarity with all the people of color who are fans of Tolkien. So Wizardway Chris helped design the translation for that shirt. And they're doing translations for the stuff that we see in the show, the season. So check out their Twitter. There's great translations. Check out their Twitter. There's great translations I found. So Wizardway Chris, we're going to send you a shirt. Wizardway Chris, we're going to send you a shirt as well. Our Eldar Millennial shirt in our trivia. So thank you for participating. And last thing before we get to our panel, bit for that, and I'm excited to get into it as well. I want to remind you all that we have some art that we are raffling some super chats already. We've got from Emily Austin, very well known artist, has donated some pieces for us. We've got the winner of the raffle, by 11 by 14 store, and pick any printout, really good options, really good options. So you can go to her store, pick the image that you want. She'll send you an 11 by 14 print. Also 6 bookmarks, illustrated bookmarks, a Hobbit hole necklace. So, and that'll all come in a nice little care package for you. So there's stuff for yourself, maybe stuff for gifts if you want to give some stuff away to a loved one who also loves Tolkien, or maybe doesn't yet love Tolkien, but will once you give them this gift. So get your super chats in. We'll be raffling that off at the end of the stream. And also, please patronize Restore. she's doing this for free. So it's just really, really generous. Show your appreciation. Go patronize her store, and you get 20% off if you use the code FOF Watch Party. At
Her
checkout.
store is lovely. Lots of good jewelry, lots of different things. Mm-hmm.
And she's got a really whimsical illustration style. I really love it because it feels hobbity to me, as opposed to a lot of the illustrations and art that we get out there. It's this epic, Silmarillion, Morgoth, the Silmarils, which I love that stuff also. But hers sort of captures the whimsical, nature-oriented style that feels like brings me back to reading The Hobbit as a kid. Well, Kyle, Jen, have I missed anything? So, well, I guess I did miss something. I want to, Emily gave me a little bit of her bio, and I want to read that before we get to the next panel, because I think there's some really interesting information in here. Emily Austin is an artist, graphic designer. She works primarily in watercolor, so there's that whimsical element. Vibrant colors and storybook wonder describe her style. She discovered Tolkien as a kid. It was hugely influential to her artistic development. The richness of his stories, particularly their evocative landscape descriptions, spurred a desire to portray them visually. Over the years, the Legendarium has developed into a recurring source of inspiration for her, both artistically and academically. And this year, she also completed a master's degree focusing on Tolkien studies through Signum University. So bravo, Emily. That's really impressive. Her artwork can be found in the 2023 HarperCollins Tolkien calendar and on several Tolkien-related book covers, including The Inklings and King Arthur, edited by Serena Higgins, and the forthcoming book series Exploring the Lord of the Rings by Corey Olsen. That's the Tolkien professor. Her online shop features a variety of artwork prints as well as jewelry, bookmarks, and note cards. She welcomes inquiries regarding private commissions as well. So please go check her out. So without further ado, let's roll right into our lore panel. We've got
Hey, I'm very excited to discuss this episode. So, yeah, I can't wait to start this. Great to be here. I'll do my best.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's wonderful to be joining, and wonderful to be joining such great panel guests. I can't wait to get talking about this episode.
And so many great haircuts and beards here. Like the combo is really.
I know.
Right?
I have to say, it's definitely the follically challenged up top stream, but strong beards.
But this part here,
yeah,
the magical number of 3.
None of us are Numenorians, judging by the genetics on the show.
Yeah, that's. I love that. And also on the screen we have or joining us is Chris, aka the Philosopher's Games on YouTube. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Very nice to be here. And I hope sound is good because we didn't test it, but yeah, very awesome. Very looking forward to discussing this with you guys. It's always a lot of fun doing so.
Yeah, your sound is great. Sounds good. So we're all good there. And I'm just going to imagine that you were similarly follically challenged and bearded on bottom, like the rest of us here, so that we have a very uniform.
It seems similar here.
That's my headcanon.
Yeah.
Good.
Headcanon, pun intended, or?
All right, so this is going to be a casual conversation, of course. It's going to be freewheeling. Feel free to jump in, although I want to give everybody a chance to talk. If you do want to jump in, maybe just hold your fingers up or something, and we'll make sure you get to you so we don't talk over each other too much, because we are calling in from different parts of the world, and we don't want the lag to result in a lot of crosstalk. So I think I just want to open up with a very free, just kind of roundtable approach. I want to hear everybody's just overall general thoughts about the episode. What were your feelings about this episode? And the way I want you to do that is pick a word, one word, to describe the episode, and then explain why that's the word you picked. So let's go ahead and start with you, Harry.
For me, this episode was all about history. History is the word I'd go with. in many ways, this was an episode about the legacy of the different cultures for the Númenóreans, for Galadriel, for the Sylvan Elves, for the Orcs even, and for the Harfoots. And I think what was most interesting about it was I've heard a lot of people from the Tolkien community saying it was their favorite episode, and we'll be handling going forward. So yeah, really good from my perspective.
Strider, let's go to you.
Well, as Priscilla TV just said in the chat, one word: Númenor. We've seen it. It's absolutely amazing, stunning, wonderful. I loved every second of it. And, you know, like waiting for around 21 or 22 years since the first time I've heard about it while I was reading the books. And now I see it on the TV, and it's every bit as awesome as it should be. Seeing Elendil, seeing that the Grand Hall, seeing all those nice costumes, it looks rich, it looks amazing. And I would agree also with Harry, a lot of history, for me, I enjoyed all the plots. So yeah, but I would just definitely describe it as Númenor. It was my favorite episode easily. Just on the sake of it having Númenor, even though other storylines were also pretty good for me.
So, and I see some people doing this in the chat already, but yeah, you in the chat there, give us your one word. I think we're going to get some good answers there. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I hoped. Originally, I also thought Númenor, but that's already gone. So I would go with setup and jump a bit into what Harry just said, because it is definitely an episode, in my opinion, that from the perspective of the character of Galadriel is very interesting, because the first two episodes were so heavy on, I don't know, bringing Galadriel from point A to point B, and now we're finally there. And then for Galadriel, it's kind of episode 1. Like now she can finally start her journey, her character development from here. We have had some great scenes with Elendil, which I found, okay, this is what this character needs. We hope to see more of that, and that we can get Galadriel a bit going into a more interesting direction. So yeah, overall the episode I also kind of liked, I have to admit, though there are some details that I would call triggered me a little bit here and there, but from a lore perspective, but that is to be expected because it's a very complicated topic to what they have rights and not and so on. So very interesting.
So my one word is going to be layered. I think that this episode, more than the others, had almost two different stories being told. One story for the new Tolkien fan, and another story for people who will get all the little references, because there were some big reveals for the folks on this panel, you know, and we'll get to those, but things that will really mean a lot, and our heads are going to be spinning, and we're going to theorize about Halbrand's backstory. I think we got a lot of information about that, but the nature of the information that other fans who aren't familiar with the books, the information that they received is very different. And so there's also mysteries for them. There's mysteries for us, but they're kind of different mysteries. And I love that they're able to toe that line and find a way to be aware of I think they're doing it deliberately, that they're telling a story for regular fans that works for regular fans, but there's also another layer to it for the book fans who are going to recognize certain references, and that creates a whole new mystery that we're going to be watching. So I think that's a very difficult task to do. I think they're doing it, and I'm hoping that they keep it up, because it's very, very fascinating. So something that y'all touched on, and why don't we just do this? Kyle, can you put a poll in the chat? I want to know what everyone's favorite episode is so far. 1, 2, or 3. My favorite episode is 3. I think this was the strongest one by far. But let's go around. Tell me what your favorite episode was so far, Harry.
For me, episode 2 still wins out, because for me it was about the pacing. The pacing of episode 2 was very much my preference. I know some people found it a bit slow, but I found that episode 2 pacing was just perfect for me. This one, in parts, there were lots of really good scenes that were given appropriate time, but then some things felt a bit rushed to me. Also, I think that episode 2 set up some of the areas of the story that perhaps I'm more interested in. So maybe I'm biased in that way as we get towards the Forging of the Rings of Power. But yeah, episode 2 is still the strongest, but this was a very close second for me.
Strider.
Yeah, I would agree pretty much with what Harry said. I would just switch number 2 and number 3. So for me, the third episode is stronger, not just because of Numenor and how awesome it was, but also because we had less storylines. So for me, it felt more consistent. It was kind of easier to pay attention to what's happening, to follow through the story with the characters and so on. So if we put Numenor aside, I would still probably give advantage to episode 3, even though it's like a slight advantage, but I would still give it advantage because of the way it felt regarding the pace. It was just easier to follow. I think it was also easier probably for, just like a casual viewer, less things to get used to. The second episode was still doing a lot of setup. The third one is as well doing a lot of setup, but still less than the first two. So I think, yeah, it was easier to follow.
Chris,
I'm also with Harry on episode 2 because I like the dwarves, and I was a bit skeptical about the actor of Elrond, and there I felt like in episode 2 he really shined and showed what he can do. Really impressed with it, and it was such a joy watching the whole Khazad-dûm section. There's a lot of cool detail in it. I don't know, it's just I spent a lot of time analyzing this particular scene with him in the Khazad-dûm section. It was really a lot of fun, also from a nerd perspective, if I want to call it like that. Really fantastic episode, very, very strong, even though I can understand the point that there were so many storylines, so much setup going on there, that people might prefer the third episode, which was a lot more straightforward, is probably the wrong word, but compressed, focused, I would probably the better word.
Right. Well, with that, let's get into the actual episode. So as big and beautiful the introduction of Numenor was, the episode doesn't start there. It starts with the scene that I actually think was the most visceral, and in terms of cinematic techniques, was the most successful at bringing us into this scene, and that was Arondir being brought into basically an orc concentration camp, an orc work camp. He's being hauled in, virtually unconscious. He's in a daze, and you hear the din of screams, children, men, and women screaming. You hear whips, you hear yelling, you hear the clanging of metal from the work camp. It is a very visceral moment. When he finally comes to, he sees that he is a captive along with many others, including the two elf friends of his that we have met already in prior episodes. So to his surprise, these orcs have captured a variety of other elves. Now, as the episode goes on, it brings us to a conflict that I think is, again, as great as Numenor is, one of my favorite moments, which is a dramatic conflict and fight that is precipitated by the orcs' demand that they cut down a tree. And my goodness, what a Tolkienian concept that is, that the elves, that's their Rubicon. That's where they draw the line. They will not touch this tree. And that's where that's what causes an actual physical conflict to emerge. And so I just want to throw it to the panel here, talk about this entire sequence, the whole Arondir sequence in general, but I think I want to focus on first, what did you think of the use of the tree as a narrative device to create tension? And how do you think that reflects the showrunner's desire to tap into fundamental Tolkienian truths and Tolkienian themes? So let's start with Harry.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've pretty much said it, encapsulated it perfectly there. I think when you go back to those core themes of industrialization versus nature versus the pastoral, the show is already trying to get us there. And what I liked, and I talked about this a little bit on Twitter, was that for even non-book readers, they set up Arondir's connection with nature in episode 1, I think it was, when he was talking with Bronwyn and she handed him the seeds, and he had that very visceral reaction to her talking about crushing the seeds. And so they'd already planted the metaphorical seeds, but then getting to actually see that, as you said, visceral reaction to the tree, when we got that wide shot zooming out from the tunnel and the work camp to actually see this kind of path of destruction across the land, I thought was very impactful to me, and I really felt the emotional weight of that. And I also felt that it was a really effective choice to have, when his companion Methor dying, his response to that is realize that he has to at some point put the value of life above the natural world, and it's not something the elves ever want to do. But again, I think it's going back to one of those Tolkienian themes of being forced to make hard choices and being forced to make choices that aren't always perfect solutions. And in this case, he wanted to protect the lives of his companions, the human prisoners, and at a certain point, nature had to be sacrificed, not in a cruel or callous way, but just because it was the only way to protect people. And so I really liked that when nature was sacrificed by the elves, it was in the protection of life, which I think is really beautiful.
Indeed, I would agree with very much with what you said, and I would remind everyone of what they said in the second episode, I think, that Arondir was a grower, not a soldier, before the war, and that really then hits even harder when he has to do this with to do this scene with the tree, and I was just very happy with that. It's definitely it hits right in the core, one of the key key themes of Tolkien, and to have this question, that tree has been here for so long, and they're also passionate about it. And Ravion has this like a short speech about that. Great stuff. And the only thing, and this is the level of nitpicking, the only thing that I had that was kind of problematic with the whole scene was the warg. It was kind of weird. CGI was a bit out of place. But otherwise, they showed us orcs. Like at the same time, they managed to hit the balance of orcs being absolutely dangerous, brutal, and horrible as they should be, but also vulnerable. The whole them being vulnerable with the sunlight, that was very well done, and they portrayed that they really got that through. I think so, at least to the audience. With how they form the tunnels and what they're doing there, and connecting it with all the plot that it goes from this village to this village, and then to top it all off with that amazing shot that awful but amazing shot at the end, as we see the path of destruction, and we can see the line of their tunnel going around, going to the distance, and the trail of destruction following that tunnel. So I was very happy with the whole arc. Really, really well done. And the way they ended it was, of course, a story of its own, but really well done.
I also agree with what was said. I found it very, as Strada said, very interesting how they already portrayed or introduced the nature, how close, for example, Arondir is to nature. That we learn he was a grower, as was said, and the scene with the seeds in, I think, episode 1 or 2, whatever. And in addition, from the lore perspective, we also know that he was we learned that he's a Sylvan elf, and that different elven clans, of course. For example, I would argue maybe Noldor would not be so hesitant chopping down a tree, but that is different for the Sylvan elves and green elves and so on. So for the Nandor, let's use this term, and it is in this also fascinating that it further expands on, or maybe hints at, a concept that Tolkien had, which he called the machine, which is basically a bit about a shortcut to power, as Tolkien describes it. So like the One Ring is a shortcut to power. You get very powerful if you get it. And then on top, you have this this shortcut to power can lead to a lot of destruction, especially of nature and so on. I think Arondir at the beginning, or maybe Revion says that they might search a weapon there or whatever. So a shortcut to power, if that makes sense. If they put so much effort into finding a weapon or whatever it might be, then of course it can be seen as a shortcut of power. In this sense, I would describe it as relatively Tolkienesque, if that makes sense, to see this. Like you see the effort, you see the destruction of nature, you see how they progress, how these trench goes far back into the land, and you also see how life is treated there by the orcs, and yeah, just for that, and then all basically halts at this particular tree and puts this very tense scene into it. And there's so many little details, in my opinion, that this particular section does portray. How orcs react to sunlight, for example, retrospectively also in a way establishing why do the orcs use these tunnels? Why don't they just go in the village, for example? I think this also for viewers explains, okay, they can't just walk by day. They wouldn't like it. It's not like they explode when they touch sunlight, but they definitely are not happy in this situation. And since Mordor at this time is also not covered with ashes, in this depiction here, they of course sunlight is a problem for them. And there's some other fascinating details. Like if you look at the hands of the orcs, you see they have like normal hands in the camp, but the one orc we have seen in episode 2 has this weird claws. So maybe he's more bred for digging tunnels. I found these, like, there's so many little information and details you can extract from this. I really like it. And then the whole setup with, at the end, I think it was said also in the previous panel, that he grabs like a little, what do you call it, a twig from the root and just stabs the orc with it. Like it goes full circle from this perspective. I find that really awesome setup there. What they did there. Maybe you can argue about the I would say the CGI of the walk was okay, but maybe the design was a bit off. If that makes sense. And yeah, so I can definitely see that people might criticize this part. Maybe also for some the fighting is too much Legolas style. I'm not sure, but overall, just from what they set up here and tried to establish, I really like this section.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing pretty briefly about this section, specifically the tree. The thing that really just struck me hard is how ambitious the task the showrunners have given themselves is. They are really making this show about core Tolkienian themes, and they're not missing them. I mean, they know what the core themes of Tolkien are, and they're trying to use this narrative to touch on them. And it is extremely hard to make a show about abstract concepts like nature versus industrialism without making it like a blatantly obvious metaphor where the visual cues just are so obvious that it is hard to enjoy the underlying plot because you're getting bashed over the head with this metaphor for an abstract concept, or you're having the characters just tell you what the concept is in dialogue or monologue, which is kind of lazy screenwriting. And they're not doing that, even though I think we can step back and analyze the scene, and the metaphors are pretty obvious. The visual cues are obvious. Like you mentioned, Chris, the big tree is blocking the path of their dig. I mean, it is a very clear metaphor if you want to look at it that way. But when you're in the scene and watching the episode, I didn't feel it to be so obvious that it distracted from the actual surface level conflict in the scene, you know, the tension between the elves and the orcs. So I thought it was very effectively done. And I think we're starting to see that, you know, with other themes, and we'll get to that. The themes that we see with the Harfoots talking about, you know, fate. Galadriel also talks about fate and the choices that you have to make. And there's a lot of themes that are being explored here by the showrunners, and I think they're doing it in a subtle way that is pretty effective. So I want to make a mention about the chat. So our poll here, favorite episode so far. So most of you were against me. All right. You liked episode 2, but the public is with me on this one. Okay. 60% like episode 3. But
I was episode 3, man.
Listen, I'll make enemies in the chat. There's no accounting for taste, you know? I mean, if you like it more, that's
throw down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Harry, I don't think you have it in you to make an enemy. You're too pleasant.
Not yet.
And we also got a super chat here. Thank you from Priscilla TV. Comment is, Gil Galad did not believe Galadriel. People are mad at her, but she's trying to save the world. Asking nicely will get her anywhere. I think she meant to say, asking nicely will not get her anywhere. And I think that is something that we are going to see play out. Galadriel is single-minded and hell-bent. She knows the importance of her task, and nobody is paying attention to her. And I think part of her conflict as the show goes on is finding a way to get people to listen when they don't want to listen. So thank you for that, Priscilla. I think let's move on to what this episode was primarily about, which is Numenor and the introduction of all of our Numenorian characters. The first of which I want to talk about is Elendil. So I'm going to set this up a little bit. In the books, we learned a lot about Elendil in this episode and the direction they're going to go with him. And when I talked about at the top of this episode how they were creating mysteries for us, I think Elendil is a bit of a mystery. Where is he exactly in terms of his internal philosophical leanings at this moment? And I don't really know, and we can't place it. And I think that was the point. In the books, his father Amandil is the Lord of Andunier, and their house was descended from Elros through Silmarion. They are of royal blood. Silmarion was the eldest daughter of Tarmanelder, the fourth king of Numenor. So if Numenor had followed strict primogeniture at the time, as they currently do, in terms of where the show is now, the lords of Andunier would actually have been the king's line. And so they are of royal blood. They continued to be counselors to the king all the way up through Pharazôn taking the scepter. Amandil continued to be his advisor until he was forced out basically by Sauron. So the lords of Andunier, Amandil, and Elendil continue to be very influential and known figures in Numenor. And Amandil and Pharazôn were childhood friends, so Pharazôn certainly knew who these folks were. However, in the show, we get a slightly different take on Elendil. Pharazôn acts as though he barely knows who Elendil is, like he had to do some research in his files to remember who Elendil is. If memory serves, he may have a son who's going to follow him into the service. Pharazôn says he was originally of a noble line, which implies the house has fallen from grace already, and refers to Elendil merely as a ship captain. Tarmiriel also acts as though she doesn't know who he is at all. Whether that's true or subterfuge, I think we can debate about that. And Elendil, if he is in fact of the faithful, he never admits as much on screen, in private moments that the audience can see, or in conversations with other characters. Instead, he responds to Muriel's direct questioning about that with very artfully evasive answers. And there even appears to be a schism within his family, with Isildur wanting to defer and go to the western shores, though we're not told what that means exactly in the show. And Elendil wants him to enroll in the Navy. So it's not said explicitly, but I think there's an implication that the schism in the family is related to them being part of the faithful. Elendil maybe not wanting to loudly or firmly embrace their past as part of the faithful. But I think this is where I want to leave the question for you, the panel. Where's Elendil's heart? Where is his philosophical heart at? Where is the heart of Isildur and Anarion and Iarion, his family? Are they firmly part of the faithful at this moment in the show? Harry, let's start with you again.
Yeah, this was probably one of the most interesting parts of the episode for me, because I think it's setting up something that the show is going to excel at in the way that the historical nature of Tolkien's writings about the Second Age was not intended to and could not. And that's, what does this cultural, political divide in Numenor mean to an individual, mean to a family, mean to a culture? And what I mean by that is that I don't know whether Amandil exists in the show. We know Anarion obviously does. But I think the point is, and we know from interviews with Lloyd Owen, that Elendil's wife has recently died. So he's recently widowed. And we kind of got a clue to that, even if you hadn't heard that interview, when Isildur says to him, heal your hurts in the same way it has for you, referring to going into the Navy and going to sea to try and heal his soul. And so what I expect we're getting down to here is a much deeper Tolkienian theme, which is, how do characters respond to their own mortality and the mortality of their family members? So if you're someone who's recently lost your wife, even if you are one of the faithful, even if you do believe in the gift of Iluvatar, it's very hard for that not to shake you in the same way in our own lives. If you're religious or spiritual in some way, the death of a family member or a loved one can really shake your faith. And so I think that's where we find Elendil. As for the kids, I think Isildur is very much trying to find his way in the world. What does he want to be? We heard that he, failed out of the Queen's Guard, basically failed out of the cavalry school. Earion is going down this path, which maybe we can talk about later, but I think is a path which has a much darker end. But clearly she has differing views, because the way she talks about Galadriel is with quite a disdain in her tone. As for what Anarion's doing, I actually think Anarion whether Amandil exists in the show, he is in some ways playing that role. He's on the Western Shores trying to connect with the faithful, maybe trying to bring together some sense of community around those still remaining faithful families and holdings. And so I think the journey Elendil's going to go on is, how do you heal your heart and how do you heal your faith in the gift of Iluvatar after losing, your wife? And so that's where I think they're going for it. And I'll leave it there. We can maybe talk about the political stuff with Miriel and Fanazon in a bit, but that's where I think we are. I think it's a much more emotional journey and spiritual journey than some people might have been expecting.
Well, and I want to add something to that and then hand it off to you, Strider. So talk about that, but also, is there a political valence to it? Elendil said to Galadriel that we forced Tar Palantir, he's not named, but the king, from power. And I think that his use of we there is interesting. It could mean a couple things, but the point being that the political situation in Numenor is clearly very bad for the faithful already. I thought that we were going to come in sort of at a tipping point where things were 50-50. I think it's much more the King's Men have the reins. Tar Palantir's already been forced from power. So I think I love your comment, Harry, that there's a spiritual element to this that flows from the loss of his wife. But also I think he wants to protect his family and he's afraid to speak up. What is it? The Harfoot line Nori's mother says about, the flower that sticks its head up gets snipped. And I think Elendil's kind of sensitive to that as well. So Strider, I want to hand it off to you there.
Yes, so you all made, of course, as usual, very great points. So I would like to just quickly make sort of a meta parallel with Aragorn in the movies. He has a pretty different arc than what we have in the books, and they Peter Jackson and his crew, they gave him this different arc, probably to set up more of a stronger character arc, because there's this debate about how complex Aragorn is of a character in the books. So I believe they're doing the same with Elendil, giving him this religious and moral and mortality versus immortality journey and debate within himself. I think that's why they're not putting him as the faithful right from the start, like the clear-cut faithful. I think he is faithful. There was that wonderful scene when he talks in Quenya with Galadriel, which is obviously a clear nod to what he is and who he is deep inside. But still, I think they're doing a similar thing with him as they did with Aragorn in the movies, where he is kind of holding back from his true self in a way. And it's going to be very interesting to see how they will handle that. But also the divide in his family is very interesting. And the mention of Anarion and him being in the west of Numenor, there's a lot of stuff happening there, and it's great that we have hints of him, because that was one of the questions, whether or not we will see him. Though I think none of us really doubted we would see him. It was kind of a fear, but we knew that he would be there. So it's great that they mentioned him right away, like in the first episode, and they're already setting up this divide. And it's a great point that Harry made, that we will see here in a deeper way than we could see in Tolkien's writings, because of course he didn't give us a detailed account of hundreds of years of everyday life in Numenor. We know all the big stuff that happened, which makes it amazing, but the showrunners obviously have to create the everyday low-level stuff happening for individuals. And I think they have set up a pretty good foundation for Elendil's family going forward. And the nod to Tar Palantir was really good, and I'm also hoping we're going to see. I'm hoping we will see Amandil. Mike, as you said, he is hopefully in at the place where the faithful are, and he's hopefully doing some things. And there may be also divide between two of them, which can also then be like another parallel between Amandil and Elendil and Isildur. Perhaps this relationship is broken. This one is in risk of being broken, so maybe they will play with something like that. And also Arian, who is basically an X factor because she's pretty much an original character. So we don't know what's going to happen with her, and that means that there's a lot of risk for Elendil's family, because we know about the three guys, what's going to happen with them, but we don't know about her, and that means a lot of risk for her as a character, but also for all three of them, because obviously she is their family member. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good setup there. I'm very happy with what they did, and Elendil was pure gold.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points were already said. I think Elendil, in a way, I'm not sure how the English saying is, but sits between two chairs, something like that. On one side, he says, like, we have to basically leave the past a little bit behind, else we die. And I think he knows that being a faithful might be very unpopular. So he wants to leave this behind, but as we see with the scene when he speaks Quenya to Galadriel, it seems like it is deep inside him being a faithful in a way. So he struggles with that, but maybe has to the outside give himself a little bit less faithful. In a way, I would even say when he has this dialogue with Miriel, it also comes through a bit that when she speaks of treason for a moment, that he's really shocked to this. Like his core is suddenly shaken because he thinks what he did was absolute right. And he stands with that. And I find that very interesting. So he is a kind of torn character. On the other side, we have this, okay, I need to get my son into the Navy, if you want to call it like that. And I had to ask some people a favor and so on. So he's also very he really wants that his children have a good time, that they don't suffer from maybe being connected to this faithful past or heritage in a way. That I find makes his character and his situation very, very interesting. And as Strider said, now the showrunners have to really set up everything. How was their daily life? What was it living there? Like Tolkien just gives very basic outlines and like beats of what happens there, only the highlights basically that we know, but what happens in between, that is very interesting. And so far I really like how they set up this character. He really tries to not get into trouble, especially he cares for his family and want them also out of trouble. He knows if he would go full faithful mode, then things would definitely get messy for him very fast. That is definitely a thing he always has to consider. And I'm very curious how this plays out, especially in the context of Miriel. It was already mentioned, Tar Palantir was in the books the last faithful king of Numenor after a long succession of kings that were definitely not faithful. And as a result, I guess among certain circles in Numenor, he was kind of unpopular for it. And here in the show, they portray him even as now in his later life, it seems exiled, if that makes sense. So how is Miriel's stance to all of that? And I think that is also already an interesting dynamic. And I guess in a way, at least that's how I interpreted the scenes with her, was also very similar to Elendil. So I find this very, very fascinating and very curious where this will lead to. Like, this has a lot of potential for conflict, and it's very interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, I love that we're getting an Elendil that is conflicted, because I believe that is not a two in the Akalabeth. There's a statement in the Akalabeth that even the faithful were not free from the fears and the feelings that came with being mortal. You know, they struggled with the same thing that the Kingsmen struggled with. It's just that the Kingsmen went all the way to the, well, we deserve immortality, whereas the faithful stuck with the Valar, but they still struggled with those same feelings. And there's a scene between Amundil and Elendil when things get really bad in Numenor, and Amundil says, I'm going to pull an Earendil, and I'm going to try and go to Valinor and ask the Valar for aid. Elendil says, are you sure? I mean, isn't that a betrayal of the king? You know, at that moment when things are so dire that Amundil is saying we need to ask the Valar for aid, I'm going to potentially kill myself trying to do this. Elendil's like, well, maybe this is still, you know, you're still being disloyal. Maybe that's wrong. So he is conflicted even at that moment in the books. And I think it's very appropriate that we're getting an Elendil that is struggling to find his place, you know, where to how to stay true to his faith while also staying true to Numenor. And in all of his evasive answers, he is, I think, answering honestly about his loyalty to Numenor. Tamriel says, are you among the faithful? And he says, I'm a loyal servant of Numenor, or something to that effect. And in that moment when he tells Galadriel that Tar Palantir was forced from the throne, he said, he's still the faithful, and we forced him out of power for it. And he uses the we there. I don't think he participated in that, but he is still identifying himself as Numenorian. Yeah. So it's, this group that I'm a part of did this thing I don't like, but I'm still part of that group. And so he still kind of feels that he is a part of that. So I think that's really interesting and nuanced, especially in this modern world where half the time we're so politically divided that if the other side does something we don't want, we say that's, in America, he's like, that's not my America, and there's that kind of attitude. And Elendil's not taking that approach. He's like, I'm still Numenorian, and we unfortunately did this thing I don't like, and I'm sad about that, but I'm still Numenorian. So it's a very interesting dynamic that I think there's a lot of meat there to explore as the season goes on. And I think now's as good a time as any. We're talking about Elendil, and I think that his plot line is part and parcel with Muriel's plot line. So same sort of. Go ahead, Strider.
If I may, just before we go to Muriel, though it's still actually very connected. You actually mentioned this as an introduction to this specific topic about Elendil. His status, the status of the family, they are obviously of direct noble line. They are descendants of Eldros, who was also name dropped, which is also very cool, of course. What is happening there? And as you said, Pharazôn needs to again do a search of his files to see who Elendil is. Like that doesn't. It's very strange. I'm not happy with what they're doing here regarding this, because I'm not happy, but I'm willing to see how it will, what they will do with this. Perhaps they have a specific plan why they're playing it out like this. So I'm absolutely willing to see how it plays out. But it's very strange that they are just seem to be kind of a random family, not a random family, but sidelined. Even though, as you said, Amandil was the counsel of the king, they were a very, very important family throughout their entire history of Numenor. So it's very interesting that they're having this approach. So I just wanted to, touch on that.
Do you think that Muriel actually knows who Elendil is, and she was playing coy for the benefit of Pharazôn?
I would say that. I wanted to say regarding her, I'm pretty sure that she will at some point, I think very soon, probably in one of the next episodes, end up revealing herself as one of the faithful. She probably, I think they are setting up this scene where this political situation where she again had to do something in order to stay in power, and perhaps by doing the lesser evil and staying in power, of course I'm just speculating now, she would remain in power and then keep the things a bit better and easier for the faithful, because she's in power, but in order to stay in power she had to do this thing. Well, she pretends she's not of the faithful. She perhaps had a key role in deposing the king. So I think maybe that's something they're doing with her. But I think she is of the faithful, and I think she knows who Elendil is.
Yeah, I was going to add to that I think pretty much everyone at court is playing games, which I love to see, by the way. That is the way for me to build political drama, the best shows that engage in kind of court politics. That's the way you want to do it, by there being two faces to everyone, the public persona and the private one. So, for example, Miriel, I think, is not only playing coy, and you kind of saw it in her scene with Elendil, where, she's saying, oh, what does your name mean? And then as soon as he went for, lover of the stars, she immediately went, well, it's got another meaning, doesn't it? Which is so clear to me that she knows exactly what's going on. And I think even with Pharazôn, one of the things I thought about was when he says, of a noble house, once of a noble house, I wondered whether the once of was not actually about Elendil, but once his house was noble. Because if we are basically at the year, 3100 effectively for Numenor's timeline. Well, then by this point, the faithful are very much not considered, okay, yes, they might still be noble lords, but they're seen with disdain. And so I wonder to what extent he's using nobility with the kind of small end there. And then also, I think Elendil himself is also playing a few games. I think as you guys have all pretty much said now, I think he's trying to protect his family. I think he's trying to avoid the political conflict, probably because he's got so much internal emotional conflict he's dealing with in trying to raise these 3 kids who are all pulling in different directions. And so I love that everyone's keeping things hidden. And as well, Miriel, while she may have been involved in helping topple her father, very clearly she's still in council with him. Very clearly she still has her own game. She's playing her own plans, which I suspect we'll find out in the next couple of episodes are very much more aligned with the faithful's point of view. There's no way she would have referenced the point about the faithful believing that when the leaves of Nimloth, the white tree, fall, it's a terrible sign. The only reason she'd reference that, obviously she's trying to test Elendil, but also it's a clear sign, both that plus the scene we see when she gets to the top of a tower where presumably her father is. There's a lot going on there behind the scenes. So I like that slow burn. I like that everyone's keeping their cards quite close to their chest.
Yeah, to maybe add to this, it's really hard to tell where Miriel exactly stands in this. I would agree. It really seems like she definitely knows more. Maybe she just plays this a little bit, that she doesn't know what's going on. But then some other nuances maybe hint at that she really doesn't know who Elendil might be, which was kind of also triggering me a little bit. I mean, in theory, they are family, and it's she should definitely know who Elendil is at this time, but it's still really, really hard to say. And I think that makes it also interesting for people who know the books very well, because you can't really tell what is exactly going on. Like, I definitely, as I think Harry said it, when she asked about the name again, said, well, does it also not mean something else? And you definitely know, okay, she also knows more about this, and the not faithful people might not be too keen on knowing too much about Quenya in details, but like these, that El can mean star or elf. It's very fascinating how this is set up, and I really liked her performance and the dialogue, and I hope we see more of this little nuanced play here and there, because it was really a lot of fun seeing. I think Miriel is a very interesting character and very well set up in the show so far, at least how I imagine to that things will play out. I guess with a faithful king like her father, it didn't work out. It brought him to exile, and now she has basically, I guess, to step in and basically again sit between 2 chairs. Like, she has to the public, maybe she has to really give the not so faithful Queen Regent, and inside herself she might really be more or closer towards her father. We also have this scene where it seems she visited her father in the tower and talked to him, and then it seems like she was concerned about that an elf has appeared. That I found, well, the elf has appeared. It's very interesting to see what is behind it. It might really have to do that there might be a Palantir, as we know from the trailers in the show, that maybe through that they have additional information or not. But yeah, using such an artifact and, I don't know, being in contact with her father and all these details definitely also lead me to the conclusion that she, in her heart, is definitely concerned to what might happen next, and also potentially more leaning towards the faithful, and maybe also worried that what an elf in Numenor, which seems very unfriendly to elves at this point in time, really has to offer. I also found it in an overall more overall meta context, if that makes sense, very interesting. Like, when we look at the massive time compression, I also read in chat, when does this roundabout play? It's very hard to tell. Like, from the main events from the first 2 episodes, it feels like it plays, I don't know, maybe 1,000 years into the Second Age, And Miriel, though, lived, I think she was born 3117, so 2000 years later. That's quite a lot of time. And I am in my video currently working on, I said something like, it feels like Galadriel on this raft made a little time travel into 2000 years of the future, meeting Miriel there. And in a way that's ironic, because Tolkien originally wrote the whole Numenor section as a time travel story, because he had a bet with C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wanted to write a space travel story, and Tolkien should write a time travel story. And Tolkien somehow went to Atlantis with his story, never finished it, but found the Atlantis part so interesting, and out of this, Numenor was developed. So I'm not sure if this is like on a very meta level, kind of a what do you call it, a wink, but I found this also kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and I want to cut in real quickly to just remind people that we will have a live call-in portion here pretty soon. We're going to reserve some time. So if you want to call in and you actually speak to us on the air through Discord, they got a voice chat. We'll get it through here on YouTube, and we'll answer your questions, or you bring your comments. You can tell us that we're all wet on all of our theories, or you can compliment all of our gorgeous hairstyles, whatever you want to do. But Kyle will put the link to the Discord there, the live chat feature there at the top. So if you want to get your comments in, please put them in there, and we'll make sure to get you the link. Strider, I know you had something.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to what Chris said. It's very confusing that we, like, the timeline compression, it was necessary, but it does introduce a lot of potential problems and a lot of things that need to be put together from like different. It's like you have a puzzle, but you need a smaller version of it, and you need to take pieces from it, put aside those that you don't need, and just make something of it. So it's tricky. But Miriel said an interesting sentence. She said, "From the times of my grandfather's great-grandfather, that the elves were non-welcome in Numenor." So I guess the history of Numenor, that kind of implies that the history of Numenor is, if we judge by how long, on average, a Numenorian king would live for, at least 1,000 years then. So again, it's just an interesting thing to crack our minds on. What are your guys' theories then? Like, what do you think? Do you have any idea? Would you care to try to guess how much time has passed since the fall of Morgoth, since the founding of Numenor until this point, based on the information from this episode?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I would say it's interesting because essentially what they're doing is they're putting narrative over lore adherence, right? They're saying essentially the most important part of Numenor's history happens once Miriel is meant to inherit power, and then Pharazôn takes power. The most important bits of the Elven story are unfortunately all spread out across 1,500 years, effectively, a little bit longer if you start with when Anatar first arrives in Eregion. So I don't think I'd even like to try and guess how much time, I would guess that it's at least, 1,500 years, 2,000 years, but I also don't know that it really, matters within the world. It obviously matters to us as we're thinking about the adaptation process. But I think at a certain point, we've been told there's been a long era of peace. We know that Numenor has risen and started its decline. We know that Sauron has been gone long enough. Even Galadriel says in the first episode, he's been gone hundreds of years. So we know it's at least that. But I think this is also where we get into that they're trying to streamline some things, because obviously in the first war of the elves and Sauron, the Numenorians come across, save the elves, Sauron's pushed back, then they go back. But all that really happens later is that the elves are fighting Sauron again, the Numenorians come across, they defeat Sauron. This time he's taken back in chains, obviously, by Pharazôn. And so I think that's one of those things where we'll see them streamlined, because for a TV show, it's just probably not that interesting for the general audience to see the same sequence of events happen, but, slightly modified, which is effectively elves get really badly, kind of wrecked by Sauron. The Númenóreans turn up, they save the day, and then the only difference the second time is that Sauron comes back. So while I would love for the show to do all of it, my dream would be a 14-season series where they cover everything. I don't think that was ever going to happen. So I think what they're doing is probably just a bit of efficient streamlining, I guess.
And I think that you're right on point that knowing the exact number of years is not important from a narrative perspective. All we need to know is there's, years of peace and kind of know where we are now contextually. But the thing that I like about my grandfather's great-grandfather line is it is pretty, I didn't double check the Line of Kings, but I think that is when Númenor stopped accepting Elvish ships. Like, I think that is consistent with what you get in the timeline. And so it allows them to, if they want to in the future, do other spin-off shows, and that can exist in a universe that is where the Second Age is 3,500 years long. So they've compressed the timeline of the narrative, but they haven't necessarily, maybe they will, but so far they haven't necessarily compressed the actual time of the Second Age. So they still have all that room to play with in the future if they want to. I know people have mixed feelings about having, the TCU, the Tolkien Cinematic Universe, but as long as the future adaptations are good, I'll still want to watch them. Before we move on, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
It was me. So I just want to add again, Galadriel also gave us a nice clue. So if we pair what, of course, I agree with what you guys said, and eventually, in the end, it's not important to know the exact year, but we still do have a lot of clues that a lot of time has passed, especially when you take into consideration the fact that Galadriel said that there was this long period of time when elves were welcome, and then paired with this Miriel's several generations behind in the past, that elves weren't welcome. So that definitely does imply that there's been a lot of time. So it kind of feels like at least 1,500 to 2,000 years. But yeah, in the end, it's not super important, especially for like a casual viewer. But it's something we all like to think about a lot. So yeah, it's cool to do that.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead,
It's a bit interesting to speculate because I feel like about the time exactly without going too much into detail. But I think what we've seen so far feels a bit like it definitely fits into the early Second Age most of the time, except for Númenor. I feel like all what we see in Númenor so far is only what is very late in the Second Age from a book's perspective. So I could imagine they would just compress all the Númenor arc into this Miriel, Pharazôn, Tar Palantir section, and maybe we see different stages of Númenor slowly iterate or going through all this process in a way with taking some wings to what is in the books, like the grandfather's grandfather and so on. So I could imagine that this works out, but of course, as a result, it's almost impossible to say when it is from the book's perspective.
So before we move on to Halbrand, and I do want to move on to Halbrand because before we get too long, and I don't want to miss an opportunity to talk about him, I want to know what you guys think the significance of Miriel delivering the sword to Elendil was, because that was a surprise to me that wasn't already his sword. That was a sword that was delivered to him by Miriel. Due to the exchange of looks, there seemed to be some significance to it, either the symbolism on the hilt or what do you think the meaning of that was? Because why would she give him a sword? It has to have some underlying meaning, and that's a bit of a mystery.
To be honest, I'm going to disagree slightly, which is always fun, and say that I don't think there's any significance to it. Well, the significance is, as he later reveals at the dinner table with Isildur and Eärien, was that he's been given a promotion to post captain. And so I think the sword is like a badge of office, in the same way that in the military you might get different epaulets or a rank badge. I think it's just like that for the Númenóreans. I don't think it's Narsil. My personal theory is that Amandil is going to be in the show. Maybe he won't appear till seasons 2 or 3. And as Elendil returns to the faithful fold, that's where he'll inherit the sword. And I know some of the very smart people I engage with on Tolkien Twitter often talk about the kind of Arthurian quality to swords in Tolkien. And so I think Elendil taking up the family sword and taking up this sword which has such a history is actually what's going to send him on his most important quest, which of course is going to be leading the faithful to Middle-earth, founding the kingdoms, and then joining it with Gil-galad and the Last Alliance. So I don't think it's Narsil. I don't think the sword has much significance, but maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I'm dismissing the show too much.
No, I would actually agree with that. So I'm not sure what the situation is, but I'm pretty sure it's very similar in at least most of the armies of the world. But in my country, for example, when you finish military academy, some like the best of the best are awarded saber. So yeah, I would agree. The way I read this is in context of his later conversation with his family. This is probably something that just symbolizes his promotion to post captain, and I also think that this is not Narsil. I know there was a lot of debate. I think like 2 months ago or something. There was a bit of news that said that even though the poster of Elendil was with this sword, that it wasn't actually Narsil. And we talked about it last week. We mentioned that the statue, that huge statue that has like a sword, it looks very similar to Narsil from Peter Jackson movies. So I'm also hoping we're going to see something like that. And I would also bet that it is probably with Amandil still, or maybe it's in Elendil's possession, but he's still not wearing it. Perhaps because it has some connection to the elves, even though it was made by the dwarves. But yeah, so I would agree. I think it's not such a huge. Yeah.
And we got a poll in the chat that people are pretty much split on whether we'll see Amandil right down the center, 51-48. But I love your theory, Harry, because it would fit right in. I had been assuming that Amandil would get cut just to streamline things, that Elendil would essentially take his place for narrative purposes, or they'd be merged. But I love the idea there, and it would also put him and Anarion together, so there'd be another sort of growing family dynamic there. Chris, you had something.
Yeah, in Narsil, that is a very interesting topic. I can definitely see Harry's point and Strider's point. I wouldn't even say I would necessarily disagree with you, because you could be absolutely right. My thought process was a bit about thinking about the story of Narsil. What do they have the rights for? That's kind of also important, like for people wondering. Narsil is in the books, interestingly, a dwarven blade from most likely forged in the First Age by Telchar, a dwarf, and I assume it somehow landed in the possession of the first king of Doriath, Thingol, in the weapon chamber. We don't know exactly. This is me theorizing here, and from there maybe it got into the hands of the Edain and was brought to Numenor. That's at least my theory. And what is interesting about this is a particular line in the Silmarillion. From the War of the Last Alliance, and we can read, "Against Aeglos, the spear of Gil-galad none could stand, and the sword of Elendil filled orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and of the moon, and it was named Narsil." This can be somehow read that maybe the name Narsil was later given at the end or during the War of the Last Alliance to the sword. So maybe it is not Narsil here. So in this regard, I might agree. But I could imagine that they maybe, I'm not even sure if they are allowed to do this, take this and it will be later named Narsil in the show when it has earned basically his name, when this makes sense. And this is currently, as you stated, just a symbol for his promotion at this point. Maybe they have to completely cut out the dwarven blade origin of the sword and make it a Numenorian sword and develop it further through the show. I could imagine that would make kind of most sense for me.
And you've sold me, Harry. I'm currently totally sold. I do agree with you that's a perfect explanation. I didn't catch that. That didn't register to me that he had been promoted, and that actually makes sense of the look that I caught in their exchange, because it seemed like he seemed a bit surprised, and that makes perfect sense because that had been a hostile exchange between Muriel and Elendil, right? I mean, she basically accused him of treason, and then she promotes him by giving him the sword. So when he sees the sword, that's the moment he knows he's being promoted. So he'd be a little confused because, this meeting didn't exactly go the way I thought it was going. So that makes perfect sense. I'm 100% on board. And it seems like the chat pretty much agrees here that that sword is not Narsil. Currently, the poll at 78-22 against that sword being Narsil. So let's go ahead and move on from Elendil and Muriel. Let's get away from our royals and to the dirty Southlander, who may also be a royal, Halbrand. And I thought he was one of his storylines was one of the highlights. And I have to admit, he was one of the characters I was not particularly interested in or even curious about going into the show. And even through the first couple episodes when we met him, again, I was not particularly interested. But now I am very interested. They spent a lot of time exploring his character, and he is nothing if not a mixed bag. Right at the top, he is a rogue who separates the raft from his companions and leads them to certain death so that he can survive. But then he also helps Galadriel out of the water and gives her water and saves her, showing great courage and selflessness. He has a habit of stealing things from people, both to help Galadriel, but then also to help himself. There's all kinds of stuff going on here with Halbrand. He's able to turn on the charm, be very diplomatic. He speaks very well. He basically helps Galadriel in court. Once all the Númenórean bullies are coming after him, he keeps his anger in check, and you can tell based on the close-up on his face, he's getting very angry, but he just flips a switch and he says, I'm going to be charming, and buys them all drinks with money he probably stole. But then, of course, all of that was not really to get along. It was to steal the guild crest so that he could make his way in Númenor. And then once he gets caught, again, he tries to play nice, but then when that doesn't work, he gets punched in the face. And if a switch flips, he's clearly got anger issues, and he just beats the tar out of all those Númenóreans in a brutal way. So this is an interesting character. I have no idea still whether or not he will end up being a good guy, a bad guy. I don't think you can be so reductive as to say whether he's one or the other. I think he'll have an arc. But I want to get to, I think, the big reveal, which is that according to Galadriel, the mark on the satchel he has around his neck ties him to a Southlander king, someone who united all the disparate tribes, unfortunately under the rule of Morgoth, but that he must be an heir to that line. Now, I, as a Tolkien book reader, the thing that jumped out at me is I thought, well, this must be an heir of Ulfang. In the First Age, the sons of Ulfang feigned allegiance with the elves, but then betrayed them at a critical moment, which allowed Morgoth to win a very important battle. The sons of Ulfang ended up dying for their treachery, and there's no indication that there were other sons of Ulfang or that the sons had sons, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that they may have. And I think that they're suggesting that Halbrand is of that lineage. I doubt they'll ever name Ulfang or Ulfast, but I think that's where they're going with it. And I want to hear all of your takes. Let's go in reverse order here. Chris, what do you think about that and about Halbrand in general?
Halbrand is a very interesting character. I think as you said, Ulfang and his descendants definitely come to mind. Is definitely a possibility. There's another quote from the Silmarillion that is quite interesting. It could be related to Ulfang, though it's not 100% clear. It basically reads, and the evil men came among them and cast over them a shadow of fear, and they took them for kings. So them here is basically the men who stayed in the First Age in east of Beleriand, and were not involved in all the action there. So they stayed there, and then those evil men that were in the service of Morgoth then came over them, and they took them for kings. So this could be also like a play there, that it's just some people who once were in allegiance with Morgoth came there, and they became kings in this region. That is definitely a possibility. This could also directly tie to Ulfang, as you said. Another thing, I also read it in chat a moment ago, would be that he might be related to the hillmen that will become the Oathbreakers, because we also know from Tolkien, interestingly, in very obscure sources, put in some notes about them also having temples and worshipping Sauron and potentially even Morgoth. I think it's either in the Vineyard Tengwa or in the Parma El Dalambra, I'm not sure. But it's very definitely a very good possibility for this too, though. Just from the position, it's maybe a bit off, but there's no reason why they should not later wander into the White Mountains. So that is definitely a possibility, what this also can lead. When it comes to Halbrand as a character, I totally agree with you what you said. Like at the beginning, I thought not that interesting, but now seeing him in action in Numenor, there's a lot of details to him. I also, when I did my review analysis of the first 2 episodes, I noted that Theo's friend, I think Rowan is his name, also mentioned like a true king that might come back, and that Theo's father ran off. So maybe he is the father of Theo, or he is this true king, or both. So I can definitely see potential connection there. We see also his what do you call it, a talisman that he wears with his little pouch, and on it we see like a bird or something, and a person with a crown on it. So that definitely was what brought me to the direction of thinking, oh, maybe he is a descendant of this king Rowan was speaking of. And further on the shot in the village Tirarat, I think it should be. We also saw one it looked like a great eagle or something eating like a person. So maybe this is also kind of related to this talisman. So there are a lot of interesting hints again, what this could be. And then another thing I thought about was to connect it even further to Theo. He found this sword, and we saw it basically consuming the blood of Theo for a moment from his wound at his hand. And he also mentions like a blood oath to Morgoth. So maybe there is also a connection between him, the sword, this blood oath, and so on. So yeah, I find the setup very fascinating. A lot of reason to speculate about it. And also, yeah, some people at the beginning or from the early trailers, he felt like an Aragorn style person. But if you now look at him, he's basically the exact opposite of an Aragorn. He's definitely not noble. He is, as you called him, like a rogue, a scoundrel. He's not caring for others. He lets the people die on this boat. This is a thing Aragorn would never do. Like that's the complete opposite of him. But though in a way it makes him also very interesting here in this construction, especially with Galadriel. And so I think this, like Galadriel, it was also discussed online a lot, if people call her like a Mary Sue, but I think what makes her not a Mary Sue is that she's very bad at diplomacy, at reading people, kind of, even though that I know it's probably not what we find in the books, but that is how they portray her, and at making friends basically. And now she makes friends with this guy and thinks he can maybe help her out, and this could maybe have severe consequences in the end, that you ask exactly this guy, because she's so bad at reading people in a way, that I feel like that is a very interesting setup to put Galadriel and Halbrand together and do stuff together. It's very curious how this turns out.
Okay, Harry, do you want to go first?
No, sure, yeah. I think Halbrand is most interesting for me in that he is probably one of the most grey characters we've seen in a Tolkien adaptation so far, in that he is clearly having this internal battle between light and dark. You know, I talked about this on Twitter the other day, but if you contrast the scenes of him sitting at the table with the Númenórean smiths, and then later when he's in the cell, there's something in his eyes that change, and it's like he's trying to push that darkness down. But after he lets the darkness and the anger and the violence out, I think all that's left for him is sadness. And I agree with Chris. I think it would be very interesting if he were Theo's dad. I think that would set up a really interesting plot, because that then raises me the question, okay, I'm absolutely sure one of them's going to become a ring wraith, but I don't know which one. So if they were related, that would add an extra layer of kind of mystery to work through. I think the other thing is as well that I think he is in many ways the anti-Aragorn, but I don't consider it from the film perspective, obviously, because in the film, Aragorn is much more troubled by his destiny. You know, he has to work through it. Whereas book Aragorn is much more, you know, kind of, I know what I have to do. Yes, I have to go on this quest to achieve my goal. But fundamentally, he doesn't doubt that he is right to rule. Fundamentally, he doesn't doubt that he should be where he is. I think so. In that way, Halbrand is kind of the antithesis of him. I also think it's interesting that in many ways, the line between Galadriel and Halbrand about we can redeem both our bloodlines, for me, brings back this idea that the show is not portraying their elves as perfectly good characters. You know, in the same way Celebrimbor in episode 2 said, you know, it was our kind that brought war to these shores. I think Galadriel realizes that the legacy of the Noldor in Middle-earth is one of violence, blood, domination, even if you look at how they dealt with the Teleri and the Nandor, you know. So I think it's really interesting that in terms of Galadriel's character development, Halbrand may be in many ways about Galadriel seeing her own flaws reflected in him and actually finding ways to build past that, whether it's through finding peace, as he suggests at the start of the episode, or whether it's through family. If he's perhaps lost his family, this is where we get into, you know, kind of when's Celeborn perhaps appearing in season 2, I would suspect. So I think it's really interesting the way they've set these two up, because I like everyone else, was very skeptical in episode 2 when he was introduced. But the more I saw through episode 3, the more I thought he's a fantastic foil to Galadriel, but I'm also really invested in his journey as well.
Yeah, well, the two of you really covered pretty much everything about Halbrand. So I will have to say that. So today we had a chat in our fellowship chat. I propose calling Halbrand Darth Aragorn or Darth LSR, because he definitely seems like the opposite. Like, what if Aragorn went evil in a way? So it's similar destiny, at least from what we are hinted at, but his personality goes 180 and he moves through life like that. He definitely feels very roguish, but he does have this Lost King backstory, at least from what we're given. But one of the most prevailing theories, I'm so fearful that it's going to come true, even though I really don't want it to be true, and I hope it's not. And I don't think it is, based on what we've gotten here, that he is Sauron. And if he ends up being Sauron, I don't know how that's going to make sense, because they're giving this amazing backstory now. They're giving so many cool hints. As you guys mentioned, the connection to Theo and that king that's supposed to be, that they're hoping that will come back at some point and unite the Southlanders and free them from the elves and all that. There is so much potential there, and if Halbrand ends up being Sauron, I don't know. I think it will kind of defeat all what they're building now, especially when you consider the fact that in some of his interviews, Charlie Vickers, the actor who portrays Halbrand, said that he sees a lot of Halbrand's character. He sees a lot of similarities with Beren, Turin, and Boromir. It's kind of hard to put their connections between all three characters, but it's kind of an interesting group to put all three of them together. So if he sees himself as one of those three characters, him being Sauron doesn't add up. So to move on to the theories about him being a king, I think that would be very cool. And my theory and my hope is that he will end up being at least one of the Nazgul, but I think he could end up being Witch King. Though then again, it was said that Witch King, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is so that he was supposed to be Númenórean, like a dark Númenórean. Right. So one of you guys mentioned, I'm not sure whom, that dark Númenóreans had this history of going to the middle people and becoming their rulers. So from the start, when we had very little information about Halbrand, I always felt that he was one of the Black Númenóreans, perhaps from one of the Númenórean colonies, which is also something we haven't dealt in the show yet. So it's a good question, what's happening with that? Do they have any colonies? Because if so, my sort of theory would be that he's maybe one of those. But then again, there's this connection to the Southlanders, to the Easterlings from the first age, the followers of Morgoth, and all the clues that he dropped in this episode about his backstory. I think they did a really good job of setting up the mystery. Because even if you, like, for example, if you look at the chat, there's like 10 different theories, at least, on who he is, which is great, which is good for the show. And they definitely succeeded in that, because that was obviously one of their goals. So I like him. He's super charismatic. I love him. I'm sold on him as a character in this episode 100%. I'm just I'm curious and kind of worried about his character arc. The only bad thing for his character arc is for me personally, if he ends up being Sauron. In the end, I think he will end up being as one of the fallen men. Perhaps also that another good theory is that he will be the king of he will end up being the king of the dead. That would also work. And I think there's a lot of potential there because Chris, I think you said that there was some references in Tolkien's works that they had that they were also worshiping Morgoth and so on. So that would fit perfectly. He could very well end up being king of the dead. And he has been to Numenor. Perhaps he will interact with Isildur in future episodes, and then we can definitely have them have this sort of relationship. And it would make sense then that Isildur calls on him because they helped Halbrand perhaps free his lands, unite his people, and then he betrays Isildur in, I guess, 5th season, and that doesn't go to war. I think there's a lot of potential there. So, yeah, Witch King for me or King of the Dead is now definitely a very close second choice. Maybe even first now, I'm not sure. I like both theories very, very much. But great character. Really, he was amazing in this episode.
Agreed. Maybe to add to the Sauron stuff, I think they kind of tried to trick us a little bit into believing that. Same maybe also with a stranger. We probably talk later about him, because we have these. We see him behind in a prison cell. We see him looking at a forge and so on. We know that Sauron is looking. It was once a Maya of Aule, the high angel of smithing, basically. That they definitely put in these references to make you kind of think, could this guy be Sauron? But they also, I agree with you, Strider, that they really set up the mystery very well to think, who could this be? And there's so many different theories, and that is a lot of fun, I think, like discussing all the theories.
And there's no better evidence that they have created an effective mystery here than our poll. As of right now, who is Halbrand? And the results are completely mixed. 33% say Witch King, 32% say King of the Dead, which I love that theory. It's one that I've recently heard about. I love it. All the narrative opportunities there, really great. 18% say Sauron, and then 50% say other. So a couple really quick things that I want to get your opinions on before we move on to the Harfoots. Does anybody want to take up the Halbrand is Sauron gauntlet? Does anybody like that idea and want to just wrap their arms around it?
I don't like it, but if I were, if someone put a gun to my head and said, defend, a plot line where they made Halbrand Sauron, the only bit of it I like is that I really like the idea that Sauron would want to try and sneak into Numenor at some point in the Second Age, work out what's going on there, get a sense of where he can start weaving in those difficulties. So like that in theory, I like. I have no idea why, if that was his plan, he'd be like, you know what I'll do? Hang on. I'm going to get myself shipwrecked. Then I'm going to get attacked by a sea monster. Then I'm going to get rescued by my arch nemesis. And then when she's falling to the bottom of the ocean, I'm going to save her because I'm just, it's a Friday and I feel like I should be nice for once. So I just don't get me wrong. I like the idea of Sauron in disguise. I like the idea of him sowing discord with Numenorians, but nothing narratively works for it beyond that. So I think, if it happens, I'll just need a really good explanation for why he's been doing what he's been doing. I much prefer the theory that Tea with Tolkien offered on Twitter, which was the reason Celebrimbor wants his tower built by spring is because Anatar's already in Eregion and is already whispering in his ear. And I know this is episode 2 chat, not episode 3, so I'll stay on topic, but I'd prefer that rather than
that's a good theory.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I just prefer that rather than him, having this kind of Bugs Bunny plan to end up on a raft only to be saved by Galadriel. It's overly complicated even for a drama queen like Sauron.
It is. It's like the whole. Again, let's not go into deep depth too much deep with that. But we mentioned it last week. But the whole path that Galadriel has to reach Numenor, her whole character arc so far feels, and the story arc feels overly complicated. And if this ends up being Sauron, Harry, as you just wonderfully put it, it's like the Bugs Bunny or like the Wile Coyote plan. How does that make sense? So if this ends up being Sauron, the whole show is going to stand on very glassy legs if they don't give an amazing explanation of how that plan was supposed to work.
Well, and even
because
if
it's just so many coincidences.
It makes Galadriel look like a total fool that she's been palling around with her arch enemy for like several episodes and just didn't have any clue, and trying to explain that away in a way that feels narratively fulfilling would be, I dare say, an impossible task.
Mm-hmm. And just the whole fact that they met each other in the middle of the ocean. I mean, if that's Sauron, he has the best foresight, like Manwehu,
Yeah. So another theory that I hate, that I want your opinions on, is Galadriel and Halbrand. Halbradriel. All right. Are we going to get a coupling here? Another elf mortal pairing?
Listen, I'll say it. The two actors have mad chemistry. No one is watching that
True.
And saying the actors don't have chemistry. But I think this is literally all of us sitting at home having a parasocial relationship with these actors and being like, listen, they have mad chemistry, so I think they're going to end up together. But I don't actually think the show's doing it. For me, the most important part of episode 3 was when he exchanged the dagger. They did, the classic Roman forearm grip, which we've seen in a trailer. They do it later. And I think it's much more a journey about them becoming, brothers, metaphorically, obviously, brothers in arms, and what that's going to do to their relationship. Don't get me wrong, like, I don't really care about Celeborn, and I know that's gonna get me fried in the chat, but I don't. He's not an interesting character to me. But they're still gonna do it. Obviously, they're still gonna have Celeborn. They're still gonna have Celebrian. Galadriel's arc in the show is very much one of going from war to peace, from hate to love, from isolation to family. So I think the fact that there's really great chemistry between these two actors is, that's just a fact of the actors. I don't think the show is in any way trying to have them hook up. But do you know what? If they did it, I would at least applaud them for being willing to risk the internet hate. But I don't think they're going to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this will happen just because. I don't know. There was this one scene in the trailer that I felt like got this idea started out of context, and in the context, I didn't feel like, okay, this was a scene where they get closer or whatever. I don't think that's not where they are going, and I can't believe it. Also, it seems like we just get the poll up. Yeah, it looks like Chad is also against it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree as well. I do not. I care about the fact that Tolkien said elves pair for life. If she cannot end up with Halbrand, for me, that's a huge no. If they do that, if they get everything else correct, and lore-wise, if they do all the great lore things properly, if it all ends up being satisfying and all that, if Galadriel ends up with Halbrand, if Halbrand ends up being Sauron, show is getting 4 out of 10 as an adaptation. It can be a 10 out of 10 show, but it's as an adaptation is going to be 4 out of 10 at best if they do everything else properly. That totally breaks, for me personally, is going to break down the whole thing. That said, I think they're just messing with us because apparently that's something they really want to do in this season with all the mysteries, and I applaud that. If they just end up messing with us with this, amazing, well done, well played. I'm going to be happy that that's the case. And Harry also, that was, I think, a very good point with the handshake, that they did. Yeah, I'm hoping that that's the story arc we get, and it's going to be against the norm in a way, because obviously everyone's going to expect them to get together. It would be just great if they just end up having this brotherly, as you said, metaphorical relationship. Please, no. That's
Yeah.
my short answer to this. Please, no.
Also write a strongly
Well, I
worded
wanna
letter
move
to
us-
Amazon then.
Oh, pff.
I'll sign on to that letter, so send me a copy. I want to move us along because I don't want to end this conversation without having touched on the Harfoots. We are running a little long, so just give me your brief thoughts about the Harfoot scenes that we got in episode 3. I think that there were some really interesting and revealing moments about their culture and the way that they function as nomads. They have really a brutal tradition of leaving people behind, which stands in such stark contrast to what we heard Nori's mother say in the first 2 episodes. We Harfoots have each other. That's what defines them. Their community. They have each other. And yet having each other doesn't stop them from just like, you know, chewing off the leg that is limping and leaving it behind so they can keep moving forward. You know, they will leave people behind. And that's just, I have complicated feelings about it. I don't know how I feel about them as a community in light of that. There are certainly arguments to be made that it makes sense and all that. I want to hear about that from you, but I want to touch on the fact that it is a very complex tradition that they have, and the way that they deal with probably the guilt that arises from that tradition, which they probably deem a necessity. You know, they honor the people that they leave behind by remembering them, which I think is a way of assuaging their guilt. It's a very complex element to their culture. So give me your brief thoughts on that. Harry, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Harfoots have been one of the strongest elements of this show. I always thought it was a bit of a genius stroke of the showrunners to bring a culture that could embody so many of Tolkien's themes into the show. I'll break it down into that part you raised and then talk about some of the specific events. As for that element of their culture, I actually think it is. I don't even like the word brutal. It's very practical. If you're a migratory culture and you are constantly in danger from the big folk, from animals, from whatever, there is going to be a sort of utilitarian approach to life. But also, from what they were actually saying, when people were left behind, in inverted quotes, it was a landslide, it was a snowstorm, it was someone getting stung to death by bees. So I think it's less a case that they're left behind in a callous way, but it's like when there is literally nothing else to be done, they cannot stop the caravan to do that. But also, one of what the people I was speaking with on Twitter was saying, well, actually, when you look at Hobbit culture, several thousand years down the line, we think of it as a very kind of wholesome culture, but there's still class dynamics within Hobbit culture. Think about the ways in which Bilbo's regarded by the rest of the Shire. I think there's an extent to which sometimes we can read Hobbit culture in a very flat way. And I think it's important to recognize that Tolkien, in the same way as he writes about other cultures, Hobbits are not a monolith, and there is still going to be those dynamics at play. As for the events of this episode, I mean, first of all, just Megan Richards had very few lines this episode, but her non-verbal acting when they were reading out the names of her family dying just broke me inside. And I think she did a wonderful job. And I think everything about the Harfoot scenes really worked for me. I like that we're getting that aspect of the pagan culture with the celebration of almost a harvest festival, the masks representing animals and predators. I think Lenny Henry's knocking it out of the park. I feel engaged every time he's on screen. I think with The Stranger, we didn't necessarily get any closer to an answer, but I've now reached a point with The Stranger, and I don't know if you guys have gone on the same journey. I'm no longer desperate to know who he is, not because I don't care, but because I'm just really enjoying the scenes. And so I'm not sitting there going, oh, just tell me who this guy is. I'm actually sitting there going, what I really care about is the way he's interacting and at times conflicting and at times helping with Nori and the rest of the Harfoots. So again, I don't think the Harfoots have had a bad scene across the 3 episodes. I think they continue to be strong. And just a real highlight of the episode for me personally.
Chris, do you want to take it away?
Okay. Yeah, also I fully agree with Harry. It's really a strong part in the show, the Harfoot so far. I like them quite a lot, and found this episode 3 relatively interesting, and especially I also found the reaction of the audience very interesting, because I also got many comments on my channels that it felt so cruel that they let people it seemed to leave people behind and so on. But I don't know. I think it's interesting. It gives this Hobbit culture an interesting twist in a way. Though, as Harry pointed out, there are of course potential reasons why they would do this. And I thought about, maybe it seems like they are always wandering, and everything they do is kind of on a, like, they're very, I don't know, focused on, let's call it destiny, fate or something. That seems to be definitely a thing. He has this book, everything is recorded, something happens, it's in the book. Or no, the hunters came on early this time. So I could imagine that the path they are wandering on is basically a circle, and so that their culture also evolves around this particular circle. And when things happen, they potentially accept it as fate, that this had to be happen like this. And of course, they record their loss. And I agree on this heartbreaking scene with Poppy, really strong. And so I would potentially think about that. The like, it makes kind of sense from this perspective, and establishing the Harfoots like this. Like, we also have the stars, which also are like very in general objects in the sky are always on a circle, if that makes sense. Like sun and moon rotating, the stars are moving in a certain way, and so on. So it kind of, I could definitely see this theme, that everything is, they're connected to it, and find that very fascinating detail. Now later the stranger comes into this and breaks things apart a little bit, though in a way he also looks at maps and at the stars and star constellation, and again kind of connects to this to all of this again, which I find theme-wise very, very interesting. That he's strange, but in this particular part he seems to be familiar with them, because the hobbits seem to have records of stars and star constellations as well. And in this context, that seems just I really like what they're doing there. The whole world building is really fascinating, and so far really also one of the strongest parts. Like, there's a lot to discover there. I like their proverb that they are putting out again, which is all related about this whole card culture that they have. It's really, really fascinating to see. Like, it feels really, really thought out. Like, it felt like a lot of world building effort went into this particular part. And even though it might seem strange that they leave somebody behind, I could imagine that this will be a topic in the next few episodes again, when we see the Harfoots and we learn more about, and we'll be maybe surprised what there is about. In addition, when it comes to the stranger, I also recently spoke with Voice of Geekdom on my channel, and he had a theory, and I had basically the same theory. There is like the poem book called The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, and there's a poem in it about the man in the moon, which might reference Tilion, the Maya who guides the moon. And in this poem, the man of the moon falls down like a meteor on the earth, and then things happen there. And this is basically the idea behind these poems, is that they are Hobbit folklore. So we could maybe witness here how this poem, basically the folklore behind it, came to be. I find that a very interesting thought in this context. So very curious what they do with this so far. I really enjoyed my time with the Harfoots.
Yeah, so a very cool thing that the show is doing, and I guess they have to, is they're really trying to give us a sense and depth of different cultures. And so far, they're doing a really good job. And surprisingly enough, Harfoots are definitely, for myself as well, a very fun storyline. Even though I have a lot of questions about the background of the storyline, I really like it on its surface, at least. The actors are doing a pretty good job, and Harry put it very well. I definitely care about who Stranger is, but I'm not in a hurry to learn the identity so far. Like, they should continue with this. I hope they will continue with the slow burn type of storytelling. Yeah, let us wait for it. Give us more stuff. They're playing it very, very well so far. The mystery around him and his interaction, it's very nice. Like, and the actor is doing such a great job, because he said, like, what, 5 words so far, 4 or 5 words, and he conveyed so much with his eyes, with his face, the movement, the body language. Yeah, he's doing very well, a very good job. But to go back to Harfoot's, it's very strange what they're doing. That whole concept of leaving someone behind. Are they not? I mean, we did have that moment of tension, or kind of tension, perhaps some foreshadowing or something, where what's his name, Largo?
Yeah.
Largo, yeah. They're worried that they're going to be left behind because they will be at the end, and so they're legitimately worried about being left behind. So I don't know what's happening there. That is a bit unusual for the hobbits, but yeah, I don't know. But another thing I want to mention, they mentioned that they're going to the Grove. So what I'm wondering is, perhaps my biggest question is, is this like one tribe, or like one part of one big larger tribe or something like that? Because that's like 50, maybe let's say 100 of them, though we didn't see that many for sure on the screen. Are they all what I'm wondering is, are there 1,000 caravans going around Ravanion and like this whole area, or like throughout Middle Earth, and once a year, at some point every year, they need to converge at this one point? So I'm wondering if this Grow mention that they made, is that maybe the hint towards something like that, because that's going to be very interesting. And I think that's maybe where their storyline may be going, but then again, they are completely original storyline, so who knows?
Maybe it's just
But
a
so
massive
far,
Harfoot Burning Man where they all meet up and just party for a while.
So
could be.
I mean,
Could
hopefully
be.
no one minds if I talk. Hopefully no one minds if I talk about something that's been said by actors in interviews. But they talked about the fact that they have an apple orchard that's very sacred to them, and that if you look at the details on the costuming, you'll find apple seeds either sewn into the lining, or there are sometimes where they're not seen, they're in their pockets, and those are in remembrance of their dead and their family members. And so I think this grove or orchard, wherever they're heading, has some significance to them in a kind of, spiritual, might be overdoing it, but it's a very precious place to them. And I think we've seen in the trailers a shot. I mean, obviously, actually, I can't believe I've forgotten it, but in the Super Bowl trailer, what was our last, ever shot? It was Nori and the stranger holding hands. And we've seen in subsequent trailers that she's handing him an apple. And so I wonder whether this is kind of where our end of season 1 arc is taking to us, that when we get to this grove, this orchard, it will be the end of a journey. And I just want to give a shout out to Bear McCreary's soundtrack, because if you listen to the track The Wise One, which I assume is the Stranger's theme in many ways, you get elements of Nori's theme thrown in there, you get elements of the wider Harfoot theme, but it also has a very bittersweet tone. And I do wonder where we're heading at the end of the season, is perhaps when we get to this grove, that's when there's this separation between the Harfoots and the Stranger, because they've reached their natural conclusion point. But I agree with you, Shira. I do think it's very interesting to wonder whether there are other caravans of Harfoots out there, and maybe this is a place they all congregate. But also, then again, it's one of those things with, they're probably not going to have 100 Harfoot extras in the show, so it might just not be something we see. Just hinted at, perhaps.
Well, and I do like, and we'll end on this note, I do like the way that the Harfoot community, their tradition of the way they deal with having to leave people behind, how that's built into their culture, the way it contrasts with Nori's own personality. I think, to simplify it, think of the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. Well, the Harfoot norm is one for all, meaning, hey, if we got to excise someone for the good of the community, that person's going to make that sacrifice. That's what we do. But we don't do all for one. We're not all going to band behind the individual to carry him along. We're not going to sacrifice the group for the one. We don't do that. And Nori is kind of more in line with that. Like, she's the full Three Musketeers motto. She gets the the one for all bit, sure, but she also thinks, hey, we should band together and if maybe take a risk for something better for the community. And really, when she's talking about all for one, when I say that, it's really about family. It's like we need to stick with each other, and I think that that's going to be a source of tension between her and the Harfoot community, and you see it starting already, and I think that's going to build and build, and I'm really interested to see where that goes. Without belaboring that point any longer, I think we do have a couple callers on the line, so I want to get to that. Kyle, can you loop those folks in? All right. Well, I know we had a couple people who were interested. So if you're out there and you submitted a request to come on the line, now is the time. Check your Discord because we sent you some links and we'd like to hear from you. We can talk about. I guess we got another quick minute here. Let's give him some time to sign on. I have a rapid fire question. The episode is called Adar. We haven't talked about Adar because there wasn't much of him in it. But based on the very, very little information that we have, and I want just short, quippy answers. This is really rapid fire. Last week, we did a little segment called Who is Your Daddy and What Does He Do? About Theo. We're going to do Who is Your Daddy and What Does He Do? Adar edition. So Adar means father. Who do you think he is and what is he searching for? Who do you think he is and what is he searching for? And first one who wants to take it can jump in.
He is a corrupted elf. He's not going to be MacLeod or any of the other named characters from the Silmarillion. They wouldn't do that. Like, as much as it'd be cool for the rest of us, he's going to be an original character, some kind of corrupted elf. And they call him Father because in many ways he's their leader and he is like a better version of them because they were originally corrupted elves themselves. As for what he's searching for, Theo's sword, but God knows what that is. I have literally zero ideas at this point. Every time I've thought I've got a good idea about it, it doesn't work with the show, so I don't even want to speculate. But they're searching for the sword pretty obviously, I think.
Yeah, I think he's a corrupted elf, and maybe he is, I don't know, was in the following of, I don't know, Feanor once or something like that, but I don't think he's a son of him or anything, right? Stuff wouldn't work out for that, and in my opinion would a bit much in the context of Tolkien's mythology. So yeah, and he might have met Sauron at one time and followed him, and that is why he has such a high reputation among the orcs, but what do I know?
So I'd like to mention that we as Fellowship of Fans had, but we were very particular about it, it was unconfirmed. We heard that this rumor that he may be potentially one of Galadriel's brothers, but it was a very strange theory, and I don't think we are really leaning into that. That would be a weird one, like to have this whole family thing with with Finrod, and then having Adar being her brother. That would be strange, but it's definitely a very interesting mystery. And so for, let's say, a more casual viewer, having Adar, who is going to be an elf, and then we have Sauron, who was supposed to show himself as an elf. It's a pretty easy thing to connect that this may be Sauron, but it doesn't feel like it, definitely, for a lot of reasons. So I think it's going to be interesting. Elves, orcs call him Adar, as you said. It means father. So I think he's going to be. To have a very interesting background, but he may be, with the stranger, perhaps the biggest mystery, because we know zero things about him. I think he may be technically the biggest mystery of all three: Halbrand, or all four: Halbrand, Theo, stranger, Adar. We have zero clues about him. It's interesting that he appeared just at the end of the episode, and the episode was called Adar. Also, I just want to say I called it in one of our shows last week. My guess was that he's going to be the big cliffhanger, and there he was. And they didn't even show his face, right? It was, I think, pretty blurry at the end. So I don't know. It's very interesting to see what's going to happen there.
Something at the TV.
Well, my theory is that it's Tom Bombadil in his youth when he was going through a metal phase. So
Sign me up.
we'll see that
if
pans
he's
out.
gonna sing
I know we have
some song, like some Tom Bombadil songs in metal style, sure. I'd like to hear that.
So we do have now somebody on the line. Before we take that caller, I want to remind you all we do have a raffle. We're going to be raffling off the art. Get your super chats in now, because after we take our callers, we're going to be announcing the winner, doing the drawing and announcing the winner. So you got a few minutes to get your final super chats in. I don't think there have been too many. So if you get a super chat in, you have a pretty decent shot of getting this nice box set of gifts from Emily Austin. With that, let's go to our caller on the line. Hello, and please give us your name and your comment or question.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Sharakov. I got a question. Do you think Halbrand Theo father of the new episode?
So thank you for your question. Do we think that Halbrand is Theo's father after this episode? Anybody have any strong feelings about that? I'm not sure I know much more than I did before, and so I don't know that my feelings change. I like the theory, but I don't have any confidence. Anybody have a theory?
Yeah, I think it's our best theory so far, and the way I think about it is less in terms of lore and more in terms of like, think about this from an audience perspective. If you haven't read the book, so you don't know that Halbrand is a non-book character, you just know he's a primary character. You want to have an emotional connection to him. How do you build that emotional connection? Well, you have him be related to someone else in the show. So I just think from a kind of efficiency of storytelling, it works for me. I don't know what that would, and again, the other point I would say in its favor is that it would add more complexity depending on which of them becomes a future ring wraith, because I'm sure one of them is going to be. So I really like the theory, but I have no evidence for it.
Yes, so thank you for the question. It is a good one, and it's one of the perhaps the likeliest theories. Yeah, as Harry said, one of the likeliest theories we have so far. It just makes a lot of sense to have him connected to one of the people, and there's this mystery about Theo's father. So, of all the theories we've made so far, of all the speculations we did based on the 3 episodes and the clues we had in these 3 episodes, I would that if I had to make one bet, I would probably say that he is indeed Theo's father. I'm not saying it is, but it does make, like, if you get all the clues, it does make a lot of sense that he would be Theo's father.
Yeah, I would also say it's somewhat a really good theory. So I would, my opinion on this hasn't really changed. A detail I initially noticed, like on when we look at Bronwyn, that they must have been together then at some point, and we talked about that. Maybe, I mean, he's relatively tall, I feel like, for a middleman comparison to the Numenorians. So he also it's very strong, considering that the Numenorians often were, like, by the normal men on Middle Earth, considered like gods. And in this context, if you look at Bronwyn's outfit, she has like a little golden, what do you call it, belt or something, and you see some sea symbols on it, like on the poster. If you zoom really in quite a lot, you see like jellyfish and something like that. So motives that bring marinas to my mind. So maybe Bronwyn and him have also like distant Numenorian ancestors or something. So that would maybe be like a little indicator that there might be more to this, but I don't know. It's really just a very, very broad theory here.
He is very tall. That's definitely a fact.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, caller, for your question. Kyle, do we have anybody else on the line?
That looks like that's all for now.
All right. Well, it's been a really great discussion, and I want to close it out. We did a poll in the chat here, ranking the storylines so far, and the results may surprise. So far, 50% agree that Elrond and Durin is the best storyline. 21% say Galadriel and Halbrand and their storyline is their favorite. 15% say the Southlands. 11% get the Harfoots. So a clear favorite there with Elrond and Durin, and that bromance has got my heart, so I think I'd have to throw in with that lot. With that, I want to close it out, say thank you to our panel, Strider, Chris, Harry, Thank you so much. Why don't you guys just really quickly tell people where they can find you? You're all pumping out your own content. And I want you to give you a chance to promote that because you're all doing great stuff. Harry?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for having me on. Thanks to Fellowship for having me on. I think both of you guys do great work and are a real service to the community. So thank you. If you want to follow me, I don't encourage it, but if you'd like to, you can follow me on Twitter at DailyROP or just search Daily Rings of Power. And if you'd like to listen to my podcast where I review the episodes, I speculate, I like to have fun guests on to interview. And we've got lots of plans for the off season as well. You can find that on all your usual podcast platforms at Daily Rings of Power. So thank you once again for having me, Chris Strider as well. So lovely to talk with you. And yeah, can't wait for next week.
Chris, you want to go next?
Okay, so yeah, I'm doing mostly like classically lore videos on YouTube and a lot of details. So if you have a couple of hours and want to learn about Elrond, maybe check my channel. Quite a bit of content about him. Also slowly starting with a bit of content about Galadriel and how she was written and created. And now currently covering the show mainly on youtube.com/The Philosopher's Games or dphgames.com. And yeah, covering the show, currently working on a review, just condensing what I also said here and in other streams I made on my channel covering the Rings of Power in a bit shorter but more precise form, if that makes sense. And yeah, I don't know, else also other social media exists like Twitter at @PhilosopherGames or also Twitch, but currently not much time to stream there, so mostly you find me currently on YouTube. Also was really nice having you here. Was fantastic to speak to you, Strider and Harry, and also Mike. Really good job. And shout outs to Fellowship of Fans, of course, also doing fantastic work for the community. Thank you for having me.
Well, I would also like to
Wonderful
say,
as well.
yeah, Mike again did, of course, an amazing job. Because again, he just gives you, he tosses you something and lets you play with it. And it was super fun to chat with you, Harry, and you, Chris. It was really, really nice. So many great things, and everybody had so many great points and angles on everything. And again, it's always cool to have people coming, from different sides, because you always want to have at least some portion of disagreeing on something, because that's what makes it interesting, because then that person is going to give you another angle on something. And I think all of us did that, at least to an extent. As for myself, of course, I'm here as part of Fellowship of Fans, and you can find us on everything: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and obviously on YouTube. We do a lot of the streams lately. It's always super fun, and we've come to our 5 minutes or 10-15 minutes of YouTube trending stuff, because finally the season is here and we can discuss our leagues. And we had several of them confirmed today. We had this type of concentration camp with elves and human prisoners. That was Adar. We saw Adar, and we were the first ones to report that he's going to show up. Of course, the mystery still remains who he is, so it's going to be very fun in the upcoming weeks to continue breaking down all the episodes, doing these lore panels. It's so nice, and listening to people in the first panel doing the panel for the people who are kind of new to the Middle-earth lore. It's so lovely, and you always hear different perspectives, because we always go so much into depth with everything. We just, but it doesn't. This line was this in the book, but they kind of did like this. What are the implications of this, or the other way around? And they always have fresh takes. So yeah, everybody, well done, and to all of you who are with us, please come back next week. It's always a pleasure, and thank you for all the comments and theories in the chat. It's so much fun to read all of those.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Strider, Harry, Chris. Wonderful panel. And we're now going to move on and do our raffle and our wrap up with Kyle. Kyle, I think this has been going great, and I just got to thank you, and I want to thank everybody else who has been helping out. You are the man behind the curtain, without whom I would just be talking to myself in a corner, which I do anyway once I sign off. But at least now I get an audience, so I can feel less weird about it.
No, this is great. It's a ton of fun, and I have a blast being behind the curtain here. It's hearing everyone's insights today was fantastic. I really enjoyed being able to sit back and kind of just absorb everything. It was great.
Yeah. And I see we have some last minute super chats coming in. So we're going to make sure those get added. So we're going to give it a brief minute here. So I want to thank everybody who has been helping us. We got Katie in the chat, Katie McKenna, who we're borrowing from the PPP podcast, doing an excellent job moderating today. And she is running a raffle and everything. So thank you to her. Thank you to just everybody. Fellowship of Fans. I really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you and do this stream. Keep an eye on our Twitter at Watch Party Network, at LOTR Party. We're going to be tweeting out new recipes and drinks for this coming week. We'll get that out as soon as we can tomorrow, as well as information about our new featured artists. And all of our artists, I'll say, have been generous in terms of getting discount codes. So please patronize them, patronize the hell out of them. They deserve it. And this is their time with the show coming on. There's never been more interest, and they should benefit from the groundswell of Tolkien interest that's been going on. So please, now's your opportunity to get a painting, support them. And Emily Austin is our featured artist this week. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And I'm really excited to raffle something off. So let me just check our Discord here, make sure we are ready to announce the winner, because I don't want to leave anybody out here.
In the meantime, I've got some of Emily's information up on screen here. That discount code is there. So everyone should absolutely go check that out. And if you want to get that link directly, just head to Watch Party Loader on Twitter.
All right. So we've got our winner. I'm very excited to say that the winner is Jared.
Fantastic.
Wyant. WEYANT. Jared Wyant. You are the winner. So please get in touch with us on Twitter. You can email us. We'll put all of our information in the show notes for this stream. So reach out to us directly. We'll try and connect with you and give us your address, and we'll make sure to connect you with Emily, and so you can get that box shipped out to you pronto. So thank you so much for your support, Jared, and we're really excited that you're going to be getting that box. Please, post a photo and tag us in it so we'd see when it arrives, and we want to share in that joy with you. So that's it for this week, I think, right, Kyle? I've had a great time as always. Everybody have fun out there in the Tolkien community. Enjoy this show. Any closing thoughts, Kyle?
No, that's it for me. Thank you so much, Mike. Everything that you guys have been doing every week, and really looking forward to doing it again next week and seeing everyone here again. So we'll do it.
And I guess I'll say, I forgot to mention, if you miss any part of the stream, obviously you can rewatch the entire stream here on YouTube. If you're down with podcasts, we'll be releasing both panels on our podcast stream. That's Watch Party Lord of the Rings. We'll be separating the panels out. So if you want these book spoiler free panel alone, we'll have that in one episode, and we'll release that as quickly as we can in the next couple of days. And then the panel that you just heard, the lore panel, we'll do that in a separate episode, all on our stream at Watch Party Lord of the Rings. So really excited. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.